State Fair Parade this year and made our way all the way down and got to see thousands of people lining up and down the streets. And it was great to see so many people, not only from Minot, from around the state, that came out for the State Fair Parade. There we are. Then on the 23rd, I did have a discussion with, along with many city representatives, a representative from Allegiant airline regarding the services, not only current services, but potential future services to Minot and the different community involvement with Allegiant airline. I was very happy to hear that they did take note that Minot is one of the communities that has seen significant growth, but also that where they are lacking some community involvement. So we're going to be engaging with Allegiant a little more on future endeavors on how they may play a part, a little bigger part in Minot. On the 25th, I did attend the first state issue of the North Dakota State and County Fairs, U.S. Postal Service at the North Dakota State Fair. Each alderman did get a a state and county fairs pin to put on your lapel. Those were available out at the fairgrounds during that event. And then on July 26th, something of note, I did have a very short meeting with a Netflix producer on Main Street for some potential future projects that they were looking at Minot. The last little bit here, July 30th, we had the dinner on the Prairie, which was down by South Prairie School. This was a very unique event. Many community members, including the city manager, were down there, and this was a nice little program that helped introduce more knowledge on where our food comes from and make sure that agriculture is fully understood and the different components and how it plays not only a part at our dinner table but within our own economics. On the 31st of July and August 1st, the council did attend the retreat down in Washburn, and then I do have the different agenda pieces on there. I'm sure the city manager will expound on that a little more. And then August 2nd did attend the tour of the Roosevelt Park Zoo and exhibits that are coming online. As you can see, as I mentioned, more than 15 other meetings with city staff and individuals. That number is likely well closer to 30. And then numerous phone calls, emails, and individual concerns concerning city business. With that, my presentation is not quite done. I do have to come to the dais for one last item. Let's see if I can figure out how to turn this around. Oh, that's already been taken care of. So with that, I thought I would take an opportunity. It's not too often that the mayor gets to take a little bit of liberties with his job, but I did decide that I was going to take one today because it's not only been recognized by me, but many other members of the community. So at this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Jim Olson to come forward, please. Now, if you would, Jim. Oh.
I dressed down for this?
Well, that's okay. That's okay, because I understand you're doing a little bit of golfing these days.
Yeah, I'm trying.
But what I'm calling you up here for is because not only have you been a long-standing community member, but I thought it only pertinent and noteworthy we take this opportunity to recognize somebody of excellence within our own community. So today, being August 5th, is now going to be, as of today, August 5th is Jim Olson Appreciation Day.
Well, there's only 6 hours left.
So I do have a little bit here to read here, just so that we all understand what it is that we're recognizing Mr. Olson for. Whereas Jim Olson has been a long been recognizable voice and face of the television news industry in Minot and all of western North Dakota. Whereas Jim Olson has embodied the very spirit and community-minded journalism for more than 3 decades and helped educate and mentor countless young television journalists as they began their careers here in Minot. Whereas Jim Olson has conducted himself with the highest levels of professionalism, integrity, and dedication throughout his entire career. And whereas Jim Olson, through his role as a journalist, was a constant source of information as well as a calming and soothing local presence during Minot's 2011 flood. Whereas Jim Olson, through his role as a husband, father, and grandfather and friend, has been an advocate, a volunteer, and a mentor to others in order to help make his community a better place to live, work, and play. Now, therefore, do I, Sean Sitma, the mayor of Minot, North Dakota, hereby designate August 5th, 2019 as Jim Olson Appreciation Day and encourage all Minot residents to join me in recognizing and thanking Jim Olson for his past and future contributions, both professionally and personally, to improving our community. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
We do have a city coin, but more importantly, I do have one that is from the office of the mayor that is also given to individuals who have given great contributions to our community. So with that, I say thank you, Jim. And if you do have any final words to say with all familiar voice, it's yours.
Final words, it sounds like I'm dying. Well, thank you very much. This is something that is just not warranted. I can tell you that. I'm just a guy who came in and found a job and kind of loved doing the job, and over time learned to do it and tried to get better and help other people along the way. So I say thank you very much. I'm glad that my family is represented here. They said they were hiding in the back waiting for me to arrive. Sorry I'm a little late. But thank you very much. I will treasure this, and I treasure all the friends and people I've met along the way. It's been the best job in the world because you meet so many people and learn so many interesting things. So thank you very much. Get to work.
So with that, that does conclude my mayoral's report. If anybody does have any questions of me or any of my other activities, the report is also available online. If not, we would move over to item 4 on our agenda, the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, it's my pleasure to bring to you the August, and I can't believe it, but the August 2019 City Manager's Report. We'll just jump right into it with some important dates, as we usually do. Not too busy this month, but we do have National Night Out tomorrow night at 5:30 at the Magic City campus. I'll talk a little bit more about that here later in the slide deck. City Council meeting on August 19th will also include the budget Q&A, and I do want to point out that that meeting will start at 4:15, and it'll also be held in the auditorium room 201. That's to give us a lot more time to get through not only council business, but the budget Q&A information as well. The next City Council meeting after that will be September 3rd, of course, being the first Monday of the month. On August 15th, the NDR Town Hall meeting will occur at Washington School at 6:30 p.m. And this will be one of the town hall meetings that will be focused exclusively on an update and all of the activities that have surrounded the National Disaster Resilience programs and projects that we've been working on. And then, of course, August 26th will be the Planning Commission meeting held here at 5:30 in Hall. So first, I did want to talk about the council retreat because this is fresh on top of mind, as you all know, and mostly for the benefit of the viewing public. On July 31st and August 1st, we did have a 2-day retreat down at the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center. There was a huge agenda that we attempted to get through, and I'm proud to say we got through just about everything. But a lot of the information that was discussed, was contained in a lot of extensive dialogue. The council had been pretty diligent about making sure no decisions were made. So a lot of the issues that were discussed at the retreat will be coming back to the city council for the public to get involved in and to also weigh in on and take public comment on, and before decisions will be made. One of those important topics is the procurement policy that was discussed at the retreat. And just as a quick update for those in the audience and at home, we are planning to revise after quite a while the city's purchasing policy. And that's to do a number of different things. First of all, we would like to improve the flexibility and timeliness of city purchases, as well as avoid redundancies in purchasing processes. We also want to have better bill and payment processing so that our overall processes and payment process, if you will, is streamlined, allowing us to purchase things much more quickly. The purchasing thresholds are also being revised, so you want to pay particular attention to that. We are updating spending limits that are pretty antiquated and have been eroded by inflation. Also, we want to improve controls. We have now a purchasing officer with the city, which is a retitled position of an existing staff member that is now taking on these duties. And that will allow us more consistent and better control over purchases within the city. And then finally, we will be also evaluating a local procurement component of the purchasing policy. This was discussed also at the retreat. Okay, no decisions were made on that, but you'll want to pay attention to that as we discuss and debate that going forward when the policy does get to the City Council. Next, just quickly, we'll move into some construction updates. You're looking here at the water treatment plant and the ongoing work that's associated with the construction and expansion of the water treatment plant. I'll have a little bit more for you on that in just a minute. But let's talk about flood control phase 1. We still have traffic impacts that are pretty noteworthy. Road work on Broadway and 4th is primarily complete, but the 4th Avenue West section of Broadway is going to be open this week, which is great news. Eastbound or east of Broadway will still remain closed as work remains in and around the Sammy's Pizza area. Construction, of course, is going to continue well into September. The flood wall footings and vertical walls are still going to be continue to be placed, and expect that work to continue through as much of the construction season as we can get it to go. The pump station is also well underway, and the concrete and underground work is going to continue again as long as we can get into the season. So you can see quite substantial work here. You're looking here along 4th Avenue, which is pretty impressive. As we move to discussing phases 2 and 3, there is additional work continuing there. The main water lines are being rerouted through the flood wall closures. Levee work is nearing completion, and the pump station is going to be tested later this August. So that's pretty exciting. There are going to be continued traffic impacts. We will have 16th Street from Burdick to 7th Avenue closed around August 7th or 8th, and that will remain closed for about 2 to 3 weeks. The contractor will be paving the northbound lanes. There will be a detour to 4th Avenue or along 4th Avenue to Broadway to get around that. Continuing, Burdick is under chip sealing right now and will continue. The west side of Burdick from Broadway is being chipped and fogged, which is a new technique that we're trying to get the chips to stay intact for longer periods. So that's going to be something we're going to be watching pretty closely for. But traffic is going to be reduced to head from West Burdick to Broadway while this work is being done. So you can expect that. We do hope to have that project done prior to the 16th Street closure, though. Water mains, we continue to replace water mains. One noteworthy one to talk about is the one that's going through the Green Valley area. This project began in early July. We have a lot of water mains that are located in easements sort of behind people's properties, an old sort of way of getting water lines in and around the community. So there are a lot of impacts, and some significant to various property owners and their properties, and so we've been working with them for months. We've had several meetings, and we started the communication and the coordination to this months and months ago. We have gotten pretty good reviews from the majority of the property owners that have worked with us in giving them notice and allowing them to work with us to try to move structures and mark obstructions and those sorts of things. These projects are not easy, and so that work will continue for the foreseeable short term. Continuing with other work, I mentioned the water treatment plant, the video that you saw at the beginning. Some of the recent work that's been completed is that the roof is mostly complete. The walls, of course, have been in place for a little while. And we're working on the underground and internal components of the treatment plant. So you won't be able to see, it won't be as visible because most of the work's going interior now. The project is a couple months behind schedule, mostly because we had some extreme cold winter periods. We got a little bit later start on the construction because of that as well. There were some unknown lines at the treatment plant from previous operations out there. And then the reconnection of the Sundry line was also something that contributed to some delays. The expansion, we still expect to be online this winter. So we think we can make up some time, we do hope. Total cost for the project is $27 million, and keep in mind the city had a 35% local cost share on that project. There's a number of other updates, so we can try to get through here pretty quick. The first one is the FEMA risk maps. As you know, the city, the county, and a variety of federal agencies have been meeting on and off for the last couple of years to talk about the development of the new FEMA risk maps. I can tell you that in a recent meeting we had just this last month that the FEMA has updated the maps based on some challenges that the city and the county and our engineers had identified inside the maps, mostly associated with operational guidance requirements and other technical merits of the maps. This created, and this was done last year when we challenged the maps, FEMA's taken it upon themselves to review our information and go back and apply the operational guidance and look at the other technical merits of the concerns. And we met with them just this month to talk about those results. So they made several changes to the maps. And that, of course, delayed implementation about a year. Most of the adjustments were made to the floodway, and those adjustments are extensive, particularly in certain areas. We were able to convince them to expand and account for flood storage for public properties that we were intending to use as storage and we didn't really need. And this also helped to reduce the floodway on private properties and in other areas. But the operational guidance, the application of the modeling that was supposed to be used in development of the model was what really led significantly to some of those adjustments. The bad news is that the hydrology fundamentally didn't change, and so the regulatory floodplain remained pretty much the same as we saw last year. So what's that mean to the timeline? What it means is that the revised maps are expected to be issued on November of this year, and the appeals period will start around February 2020. They expect all appeals to be addressed by July of 2020 and the letter of determination or final determination to be generated somewhere in and around August of 2020. And of course, 6 months from that is essentially when the new effective maps become applicable. And that looks to be somewhere around February 2021. And we have been told that these dates are somewhat loose, if you will, but I think that's what we can kind of expect looking forward in regards to the timeline. Next, the mayor did mention this, so I won't go into detail too much, but the Main Street convening, we were chosen as a host city for the Planning Region 1 and 2 areas. That includes Minot, Williston, Watford City, Bottineau, Rugby, Granville, Velva, and surrounding areas. The topics were discussed, three primary topics were discussed in the convening: housing, community engagement, and workforce development, with a number of different ideas, networking, and information sharing that occurred from the meeting. And so the idea is that these meetings will kind of continue on either a semi-annual or perhaps quarterly basis with other topics being introduced to allow for more regional discussion and hopefully regional solutions to a variety of issues. And of course, this is being sponsored and led by the Governor's Main Street Initiative and does involve other local contributors like Source Basin Planning Council and others. So we're grateful for that. Thought it was a good meeting. Had quite a few in attendance there, and looking forward to the next one. Up next, I wanted to just let everyone in our community know that we are in receipt of a $10,000 gift from the Irvin and Ida Weber estate for the cemetery. This is a fantastic gift for our cemetery. It will allow us to construct a gazebo and also plant a variety of new trees in and around the cemetery. So we just want to thank the Webers for and their estate for this wonderful gift. It will go a long way in helping to beautify and improve the amenities at the cemetery. So I want to, again, shout out a big thank you for that. The State Fair is unfortunately over, but I know many of you were there. I ran into some of you multiple times. I was there almost every day. We had nearly 300,000 that came and attended the State Fair. That rivals the 2016 and 2017 numbers. State Fair was well attended and certainly a great time for all. And I know that many of you, as well as I, are looking forward to next year's State Fair. Lastly, I wanted to make a couple of announcements here as it relates to notable staff happenings. The police department, if you didn't get to attend on Friday, held a very, very nice ceremony to recognize three major components of the operation. First, they swore in 3 new police officers, and their names are here on the screen for you. So we're very proud of them finally being able to be sworn into the force. 4 officers were also promoted to senior officer, which is also great. And then 4 other officers received Lifesaver Awards from the North Dakota Peace Officers Association. Again, their names are on the screen as well. So I very much appreciate the contributions of those officers, and I recognize again our Chief of Police, Jason Olson, for putting on these recognition events and making known to all just the contributions that our officers are making each and every day, and the advancements that they undergo inside the department. Also, another notable happening is Stefan Jers of the engineering department received his professional traffic operations engineer certification. This is important because he is now one of 8, or an elite group throughout the state that has this certification. So this is, again, great that we have staff that are they're going the extra mile to improve their credentials and contributing at a higher level inside our organization. So again, thanks to Stefan and to those in the police department. Up next, I want to introduce you to the next newest recruit we have for the city. We do have another shepherd that's being added to our police force. So I wanted to turn this over to Chief Olson, who's going to do the introductions, and then also speak a little bit about the grant that was received to help pay for this dog. So, Chief.
Thanks, Tom. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as I talked to you in July, I said I'd be back to introduce our new canine. And so, first of all, I'm going to start off with calling up representatives from Farm Credit Services. I believe we have several here today. So our new canine was made possible by the Rural Community Grant that we applied for. That is a program with Agribank and Farm Credit Services, and it was a grant of nearly $20,000. Gordon? I'm sorry, Gordon?
I'm Gordon.
Gordon? Yeah. Thanks for coming. Yeah. Do you want to speak about the grant at all, or just?
Sure. So, Farm Credit Services, one of the things that we do that we are proud of and feel very good about is we run the Rural Community Grant Fund, and we have for several years now. And I believe we've exceeded $4 million in grants to meet various needs across our territory in western North Dakota. And I think we all have gained an appreciation over time how effective canines can be. And we're just delighted to be able to contribute to such worthy causes.
Okay, thank you. So I'll call in Senior Officer Taylor Jensen. She's our handler, and introduce Caspian to you. Did you want to do the check? So as I said, this was a grant of nearly $20,000 that allowed for the purchase of Caspian, and he is a 2-year-old Tervuron Shepherd.
Wow, cute.
You want to maybe sneak in the middle?
Sure.
And you have, yeah, as long as you have pictures, that's great. I don't know if there's anyone else that wants it. Excellent. Okay.
Thank you very much. Present to you as a token of our thanks.
All right. Thank you.
So to finish up, I'll have Officer Jensen just give a real brief demonstration. She can explain what she's going to do here.
I'm very interested in you guys.
I don't know if she's worried. Do you want to explain what?
He knows where it's coming from.
So he's trained on to 15 different categories of explosives. So I'm just going to show you guys a little bit of odor work of what he does. I'll set up 3 different boxes. He's not going to know which one has the explosive in it until he sniffs all of them. So
Caspian is a dual-purpose dog, so in addition to explosive detection, he is trained on patrol work, officer protection, searching for objects, searching for people, in particular like firearms, casings, and so on.
And eager to do his job.
He is very eager. Oh, you're cheating.
So by sitting, obviously, he's indicating that he found it in that box.
Yep, it's right there. Got it.
Good, Mr. Klug, run. I want to see what happens.
Not quite that fast.
Good. One more. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep. Sit.
There we go.
Very nice. Better yet.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jefferson. Thank you, Chief, and appreciate that very much. The demonstrations always are way better than just telling you and seeing it on a slide. So we're glad to do that for you and let you see what those animals are capable of and what the contributions are they can do in our community. They're just absolutely amazing. All right, next we'll talk about National Night Out. I just want to encourage anyone from our community to attend National Night Out. This is a really, really great event. It's held annually. This time it'll be held August the 6th, which is tomorrow night at 5:30 at the Magic City campus. Come and learn about all sorts of different things in keeping your community safe. There will be activities, food, games, a variety of demonstrations, and those sorts of things. So this is a really great event for our community, and it's an opportunity for our citizens to get involved and meet directly with members from our community doing all sorts of important things to keep us safe. Next up, I wanted to mention that next week, August 12th through the 16th, is Free Ride Week on our transit system. So anyone of any age wanting to go anywhere can just jump on a bus for free during that time period. All the fares will be suspended. So it's a great opportunity to introduce folks who may not know about the bus system or may not have experience utilizing the bus system to just kind of try it out for free. So we're excited to do that. We do want to promote ridership in the system. And we have seen ridership grow slowly over the last few years, which is great. We'd like to continue to see that. So that's just a good reminder for Free Ride Week for next week. With that, I'll take any questions you might have. That's the end of my report.
Thank you, City Manager Barry. Any questions for our City Manager? Thank you, Tom.
Great. Thank you very much.
And that takes us to number 5 on our agenda, the City Attorney Report.
Mr. Mayor, I submitted a written report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from council from the submitted report from our City Attorney? Thank you, Kelly. Number 6 on our agenda this evening is consider the report of the Planning Commission. We did have a number of items from the Planning Commission. And we can either go through these individually or take them, I think I was asked to pull number 6.6 and 6.7 for individual discussion on the Planning Commission. If not, I would look for a motion from
Move
Council.
approval on the remainder.
Second.
Motion to approve by Alderman Olson, second by Alderman Pittner. And again, that is all items except for 6.6 and 6.7. Otherwise, they will be passed as recommended from Planning Commission.
Mr. Mayor, just a point of clarification. A number of these items are public hearings. My assumption is we'd have to take them individually.
City Attorney, I would look to see if we've already held a public hearing during our Planning Commission. Do we need to hold another public hearing again here tonight?
Mr. Mayor, I believe the ordinance does require a public hearing.
It does on the second. Okay. Thank you. Then we will take the public hearings portions of these individually. And I would look then to Alderman Olson and then Alderman Pittner for the remaining items for consent.
Yes.
Okay.
Second agrees.
Okay. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion for all items except for 6.3, 6.4, 6.6, and 6.7? Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion approved. 6.3 from the Planning Commission is a public hearing, the Ramstead Heights 3rd Edition. A public hearing to consider the request by the Bakken Development Group Minot 1 LLC to rezone from R4, the planned residential district, to R1S Single Family Residential District with small lot flexibility. Is recommended the City Council approve the motion to subdivide lots 16A through 21B of Block 5 of the Statesboro Edition into a single family lots to be known as Ramstead Heights 3rd Edition. This is a public hearing, an opportunity for anyone to speak in favor or against the item. Again, opportunity for the public hearing to speak for or against. If not, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Alderman Janser.
I'd move we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Pittner to close and approve the item. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes, motion is approved. 6.4, another public hearing, the Ramstead Heights 4th Edition. A public hearing to consider a request by the Bakken Development Group Minot 1 LLC to rezone from R4 to R1S Residential District with small lot flexibility. It is recommended the City Council approve a motion to subdivide lots 15A of Block 8 of Statesboro Edition into single-family lots to be known as the Ramstead Heights 4th Edition. Again, this is a public hearing, an opportunity for anyone to speak for or against the item. One last time for the public hearing. Looking for a motion.
Mayor, I would move that we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Motion to close the public hearing and approve the item by Alderman Pittner,
Second.
second by Alderman Olson. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 6.6, another public hearing, the Retriever Ridge subdivision. A public hearing to consider a request by Terry Davis for a rezone from Ag District to Agricultural Residential District on Retriever Ridge subdivision. The recommendation of the City Council is approval of a motion for a subdivision plat of a 4-lot rural residential subdivision to be known as the Retriever Ridge subdivision on property described as Section 25-156-83, south half of northeast quarter of southeast quarter. Again, this is a public hearing for anyone to speak for or against. If you could just say your name for the record, please.
Okay, my name is Matt Munson.
Good evening.
Okay, I'm president of the Minot Gun Club. Our club is adjacent to those lots. I guess our biggest concern, we have two of them, is the water runoff for, that guy was pumping water over our road a few years ago during the high water years. It flooded all our trap houses. And also, what's to say a couple of years now, he comes down the road and says, you guys are making too much noise. So are we going to get tied up in a lawsuit that way? I guess that's what we're worried about. Our club was built there before 1969 to avoid encroachment. We have a lot of high school programs and a lot of youth-oriented activities out there, so we're just kind of trying to make sure we don't get snuffed out. about all I have to say, I guess, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Munson. Any questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Munson, if I could, please, before you sit down, sir. I was under the impression that your concerns were additionally addressed by, at the Planning Commission meeting, maybe there was an alternative presented, some additional drainage. Is
They
that not
talked
the case?
about, yeah, they talked about some drainage, and he'll have to comply with the county. There was nothing addressed about if down the road he wants to come after us for noise violations or anything. I mean, we're out of city limits, so that shouldn't ever be a problem, but there's been plenty of clubs in the area that have had that happen.
Sure.
So that's all I'm worried about, is that somebody's gonna all of a sudden put us in litigation where it'll bankrupt the club. We don't have money for that.
Yep.
That's my main concern.
Thanks, sir.
Appreciate that, sir. Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Munson? If not, come forward and name for the record as well, please, sir.
David Van Lith. We're on 6311 11th Street Northeast, and 11th Street was never built to spec when the addition was built. You know, and one of the problems we foresee is with the increased traffic and construction traffic and things of that nature, we're forced to try and fix that road ourselves right now. Most of us in that area are either retired or nearing retirement and pretty much on a fixed income. And 13th Street, which is on the very east side of this proposed project, was built to spec. That's a township road that can handle the traffic. Ours cannot. The first 2 blocks on 11th Street would just get tore up, and that's going to force us to be under a financial burden and probably not be able to get things done properly. You know, that's our concern in that area. You know, the only thing he's required to take care of is from 64th to the north. What about the other 2? You know, we can barely keep up the way it is. It's pretty typical. I buy about $400 worth of gravel a year, and I use it every year just to patch holes and whatnot on that gravel road. And it's not enough, but that's the way it is. Most of us didn't realize that we were responsible for that road when we moved in. It's not a township road and it's not a county road, and we're stuck with it. So now, if you let him move forward with this, we're stuck with this.
Any questions for Mr. Van Lund? Thanks, sir. If I might maybe just have our principal planner, Lance, if I could just ask you a quick question regarding, and I do understand that this is in the 2-mile ET, regarding the road itself with the subdivision. Is there any improvements that are required, or what is our understanding of the situation of the road in question?
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. The townships in Ward County have control, and they have different standards in every township. This is Eureka Township. Not for certain what the standards are. The city engineer, Lance Meyer, did say at Planning Commission that the agreement, the developer's agreement, would specify, and a condition of the Planning Commission was to have the roads built to Eureka County or Eureka Township standards. So whatever those may be, that's what it'll be. And Mr. Myers said if they don't have a specific standard, there's an engineering standard for those types of roadways in the county that is pretty standard. I don't know if you.
Okay, thank you.
And then also the floodplain or the water issues would be addressed as one of the conditions the stormwater management plans required, just like any other subdivision.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Alderman Walski, you have a question.
I do have a question. I think Mr. Lang may be able to answer it. If not, I'm sure another appropriate party might come forward. But Mr. Lang, assuming this road is built to Eureka Township standards or the standards that are required in this circumstance, and they're completed to spec, what happens after that? The continued maintenance, the snow plowing, or any of that continued required work. Again, we have an example of a road that's in part through the desired subdevelopment, but we also have obviously the impacts of the property to the south will be for maintenance, and other concerns will be legitimate as well.
Certainly, Alderman Wolski, the city doesn't maintain any roads outside of the city limits itself. So all the 2-mile roads would be tied back to the township. So whatever Eureka's standard is, if it's built to that standard, it'd be up to them if they were to take maintenance of it. If not, it would be a homeowners association or the developer that would have to take care of it.
Any further questions for our principal planner? Thank you, Lance.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Public hearing is still open. This is, again, the opportunity to speak for or against. If not, I would look for a motion from the council.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we deny the proposed subdivision.
We have a motion to deny the,
Excuse me, to close the public hearing and deny the proposed subdivision.
thank you, Alderman Walski. Motion to close the public hearing and deny the subdivision. Is there a second?
I'll second for the discussion.
Second by Alderman Straight. Alderman Walski.
Just want to provide a clarification to my motion. As the city attorney suggested, there's also a rezone attached to this. And I would include a denial of a rezone to the motion.
Is that concurrent with a second? So we have a motion and a second for denial of the subdivision and the rezone. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, if I might, I do have another question, seeing as we're out of the public hearing. I'm not sure who's the appropriate party to ask on this. But one of my concerns is Park District dedication. I'm wondering if, because this is in the extraterritorial, this property is treated with a different standard than if within city limits. We had 2 projects come before us with Ramstead Heights that I think were required to have $1,000 each for each lot. If anybody can speak to whether a Park District dedication is required on this project, I would like to have an answer on that.
Fortunately, we do have Parks Director Ron Merritt. This falling in the extraterritorial area again. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Merritt.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Walski, because it is less than 6 contiguous lots, there would be no park dedication on this subdivision. The other ones fell into a category where it was required, but this one is small enough that it does not.
So just for clarity,
Continue.
if it did meet the threshold, the dedication would be required, even though it is in the extraterritorial.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt.
Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion. Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I guess just thinking ahead to future progress that's kind of seemingly happening all over town towards some of the ET areas, I feel like this is going to be an issue that we're going to run into probably multiple times, whether it's this council or future councils. And I think it's maybe a recommendation for our city manager that we better study some of these areas, the future developments in terms of the comprehensive plan, some of the developments, because I think there's a number of issues that could arise, dollars that are going to have to be spent that are ultimately going to fall on all the residents in the audience tonight, as well as the rest of the community. And I think we should have a handle on some of these, because it's, to Mr. Munson's point, they were outside years and years ago, and I think that we can all imagine at some point that there are going to be concerns from a subdivision about what's happening at the gun club. And I think it just has to be part of our planning process.
Further discussion on the motion to deny, close the public hearing, deny the rezone, and help me out. Subdivision. Thank you. Alderman Walski.
Mr. Mayor, one more process check question here. This is likely for somebody in our planning department, but do we have an automatic notification to Eureka Township? Do we get comment back on a project like this where we're, an approval of this road and this extension of the network is clearly an added tax burden and maintenance cost to taxpayers in that jurisdiction? I'm curious as to what our notification practices are.
I think for that, perhaps we'll look to our principal planner one more time. Mr. Lang.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Wolski, we have letters that go out to a number of different agencies, and we generally don't get comments back from them. The exception would be the Department of Roads is very consistent about providing comments back every month. We don't hear back from the school districts or the townships or rural water, or maybe we send out a lot of different letters.
Okay, so I appreciate that. We made all the appropriate notifications and simply did not get comment back.
That's correct.
Okay.
Any further questions for our principal planner while he's at the podium? Lance, if I could, perhaps just one quick follow-up regarding the approval from the Planning Commission. Refresh my memory, sir. What is the number of residents that could potentially occupy that area for the subdivision that was proposed?
Mr. Mayor, the subdivision is a 4-lot rural residential subdivision, and 2 of the lots are already occupied with housing. There's a manufactured home on one lot. There's a modular home on another lot, so there could potentially be 2 more homes, and manufactured homes could not be moved out there based on our current code. It'd have to be modular stick-built, so 2 additional homes. And the applicant did hire a professional surveyor to prepare the plat. So all the recipes, so to speak, in the ordinance, all the regulations for lot sizes, road widths, the stormwater management plan we talked about, all those issues follow the same procedures we would with any other subdivision.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Lane.
Thank you.
Any further comments on the motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Alderman Olson.
I certainly am sensitive to the concerns that the residents have shared, but I do think with Mr. Lang's last comment that I will be voting against the motion that's right before us, because I do think that the issues that they have brought to us will be addressed.
Any further discussion? Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, I just thought I would offer the basis for my motion. We've been dealing with I would say conflicting property uses and methods for determining a path forward as we've gone through the county comprehensive plan process. And one of the ideas that has stuck with me is the fact that when you get into these rural areas where there are some crossover uses and some competing interests, when you have a new use proposed where there is a long-established use, in this case, the case of the gun club, I think as a general policy, it's appropriate for the established use to prevail. And so that's the reason for my motion here. I believe the encroachment into the gun club's long-standing uses is appropriate for denial in this case.
Further discussion? Alderman Patagula.
I guess I'm not so keen on denying the motion. I think it's gone through the Planning Commission. If you want to build a house or a development by a gun club, I very much agree that their pre-existing use should take priority. If you want to build a house there and hear gunshots, that's your business. We've had this issue before with cattle, people moving out into agricultural areas. Then they complain about the noise and the smell of cattle. Well, I'm not terribly sympathetic. You move to an agricultural area or you move to a more rural area, I think you take the risk that of those things that are out there already. I don't see those two being incompatible. If you want to develop that property, I think you should have that right. You will be exposed to gunshots, and that's just the way it is. And I think it's up to the townships and the county to provide adequate roads. I mean, I'm very impressed that the people in that area, pay for their own roads. I think the proper bodies to lobby would be the county commission and the township board to make sure that they are adequate. And if our planning people assure us that the drainage and the roads will be adequate, or at least be up to standards, I'm okay with that. I don't see development and the gun club as being incompatible uses.
Further discussion? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. A lot of people have spoken to this, and I'll just weigh my comments. And I agree with Alderman Padragula in the sense that if someone wants to develop their land, they should have that right. And if someone wants to build next to a gun club, they should have that right. It's not the responsibility of us as a government entity to make individuals who live out there whole. If they bought a road, and the road wasn't maintained and they weren't aware of that, that shouldn't stop or limit an individual from further developing their land. They have that right as an individual, as a landowner, so I too would support approving the recommendation from Planning Council.
Further comment? Again, the motion is to deny the rezone and deny the subdivision. Please call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
No.
Janser?
No.
Olson?
No.
Pittner?
No.
Padragula?
No.
Straight?
No.
Motion is denied. Looking for a motion from council.
Mr. Mayor,
Alderman Olson.
I would approve, or I would move to approve both the rezone and the application.
Second.
We have a second from Alderman Olson, or first motion by Alderman Olson, a second from Alderman Pittner. I'm assuming closing the public hearing is also part of that
Yes,
motion.
it is.
Thank you. The second does,
Agrees.
agrees. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I apologize for my interruption in standing up, but I was curious who sits on our township boards. And so I think it's something where I've been appointed for one for 3 years, and I've never once been called to a meeting. And I think it's time that we're pretty mindful, because it's important to attend those if they're being held, because I think that the concerns are valid. I recognize the Planning Commission's hard work on this, and that's why I'm supportive of their work tonight. But I have real concerns about how some of these issues are going to continue to manifest themselves as we move forward, and that's why it's important that we figure out ways to develop infill. So, thank you, sir.
We will look at ways of re-engaging. Thank you, Alderman Straight. Further discussion on the motion. Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Nope.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to number 7 on our agenda this evening of consent item. I'm sorry, 6.7. I went right by that one. Apologize. We have our last public hearing out of Public Works, Southwest Crossing, CCRC, Lot 1, Block 1, Lot 2, Block 1, Lot 1, Block 2, Lot 2, Block 2. I think we got them all there. It's recommended the City Council adopt a resolution approving the request by Southwest Crossing, CCRC, for a planned unit development to develop a retirement community. Number 2, adopt a resolution to approve a comprehensive plan map amendment from the low-density residential and medium-density residential to the high-density residential. Hold a public hearing to consider a request to pass the ordinance to approve a rezone for R4 planned development, R3 multifamily residential, R3C the townhouse residential, and R2 two-family residential to RH residential high-density, and approve a motion for a subdivision plat to be known as the Southwest Crossing CCRC subdivision. Again, this is a public hearing, an opportunity to speak for or against the motion that is before us, or the item that is before us tonight. Last opportunity. If not, I would look to the council for a motion. No, we do have one gentleman. If you could state your name for the record, please, sir.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I'm Mark Black, and I'm just here in favor of the project. I'm working with the partners to put this together, and I just wanted to introduce myself and let you know I'm here if there's any questions that you'd like to ask.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Wolski, perhaps, Mr. Black, we do have a question?
Yes. Just briefly, Mr. Black, the entity developing this property, is this a for-profit or a nonprofit?
It's a for-profit.
Okay.
One more time for the public hearing, an opportunity to speak for or against the item. Now I'd look to the council for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Second.
Motion to close the public hearing by Alderman Wolski, second by Alderman Straight. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Walsky.
Mayor Sitma, kind of just a comment here. And going back, I think even now several years in terms of our discussions up here, we've talked about the future costs associated with outward development. I know, Mr. Barry, at one point in time, you had mentioned the fact that you were working on delivering a mechanism for better evaluating the overall financials associated with projects like this. I know there's been a lot on the plate for the last couple of years. I just wanted to renew my desire, when it's feasible for that work to be completed, to be able to start evaluating these projects on a more significant financial basis too. As a last mile at the end of a line, this project is going to add some costs. It's obviously a great project. It's very well complementary to the larger hospital development taking place there. But the better informed we are, I think the better we're able to make decisions in the future. So.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padrigula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to number 7 on our agenda. This is the consent items. I've been asked to pull 7.9 and 7.12 out of our consent numbers. Are there any other items? Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move consent on the remaining items.
Second.
Motion to approve the remainder of the items excluding 7.9 or 7.12, second by Alderman Olson. Any discussion on the motion? And for the audience in attendance, that is again approval by recommendations of staff on all items except for 7.9 and 7.12 on our consent. Any last discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padrigula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion is approved. 7.9 on our agenda is the agreement for design and construction engineering P 3135.2E, the swift repair of bank stabilization, dredging, and culvert cleaning. The recommendation is for approval of the engineering contract with Houston Engineering for the SWIFT E. Authorize the mayor to sign the agreement on behalf of the city. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to approve by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion.
Mr. Mayor, this was pulled at my request. I have a question for Mr. Jonason.
Good evening, Mr. Jonason.
Good evening,
Mr. Jonason, I did not get a chance to take a very close look at the larger scope and areas of work on this, but do we have instances inside of this approval where we are essentially authorizing the reconstruction of gate wells into existing dead loops?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Walsky, no, not on these. These are basically repairing some of the eroded bank areas and then cleaning the pipes into the dead loops on this project. Yes.
Okay. I appreciate hearing that down, and I raised the question because I must have gotten something wrong in one of our past proposals, because as I see the work going on over by Oak Park, where we do seem to be replacing an entire gate wall structure over there, or very nearly so, obviously I got a little excited because I don't want to see us spending money perpetuating what I think even the council has acknowledged through resolution is a system that could be a whole lot better. So I just ask that you keep a very close eye and make sure we don't have dollars going to perpetuate this.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Walsky, I certainly will. In regard to the repair over at Oak Park, initially we're not reconstructing that whole thing. There was a steel pipe there that was attached to the gate well, and we're putting concrete back in there. So they have to do some, I guess, removal of some of the concrete in order to reattach that concrete pipe into it. So we aren't redesigning it. We're just making sure we don't have any leaks on where we attach the new pipe to it come flood fight time.
Thank you, Mr. Jonason. Any questions? Well, Dan is at the podium. Thank you, sir.
Thank
you. Further discussion on the motion for approval. Further discussion. Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Quadrigula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes, motion is approved. 7.12 is the authorization of the final application to the Governor's Fund for Community Development. This is an application was made to the Governor's Fund for Community Development in the amount of $760,000 for Lutheran Social Service Housing as leverage funds for the CDBG NDR project with this nonprofit through the subrecipient agreement for the family homeless shelter and 17 units of the multifamily rental units on the same site. Of the amount requested, the Governor's Fund is authorizing $300,000 to proceed in the final application. The recommendation of the City Council is to authorize the final application to be made for the $300,000 to the Governor's Fund for the Community Development set aside in support of the Lutheran Social Service Housing Incorporated project being funded primarily through the two subrecipient agreements from the CDBG NDR grant, and authorize the mayor to sign all documents in support of the application.
So moved.
Motion to approve by Alderman Wolski.
Second.
Second by Alderman Straight. Discussion. Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Mayor, a question here I expect possibly from Mr. Zakian, but if we requested $760,000 and we are proceeding with $300,000, I'm curious about where the $460,000 gap is coming from.
Good evening, Mr. Zakian.
Good evening. Mayor Sitma, Alderman Wolski. The short answer is that that gap isn't absolutely necessary. It made the project, it gave the project additional options in terms of what they would ultimately do, but in terms of what we are requiring them to do and what is expected of them to do, the $300,000 is sufficient. Before we brought this before you, we had a long conversation with Lutheran Social Services Housing as well as their construction experts. And they understand that they're on the hook for both of these projects, and they fully represented that the $300,000 is sufficient for them to carry out both projects.
Continue, Alderman Wolski.
John, it seemed like as a part of this project, there was also that same $460,000 was attached to NDR leverage. Did I understand that correctly? And are there any implications for the leverage we're required to deliver to the NDR program?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Wolski. No, actually, any of this money, any of the original 760, we can use as leverage. It will be new leverage. Because remember, the leverage is set in the grant agreement that the city signed back in 2016. So any kind of leverage we receive like this is new leverage we can actually use to offset leverage we have not yet received. So this is actually an added benefit for us from a compliance standpoint.
Any further questions for Mr. Zakian? Thank you, John. Further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Quadrigula,
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That does finish up our consent items. Then now to item number 8, or section 8 rather, the actionable items. 8.1 is a public hearing, building relocation request to 513 11th Street Northwest. A public hearing to consider the request by Rose Barkey to relocate a single-family residence garage and accessory building from 1313 27th Street Southwest, Minot, North Dakota 58701, also known as Leithal's Outlot 3, Lot 8, 9, 10, and 11, to 4900 30th Avenue Southeast here in Minot, also known as Sublot B of Outlot 5 and Section 33-155-82, subject to the conditions in the memo. This is a public hearing, again, to speak in favor or against the item that is before us. Please come forward and state your name, please.
Hi, Mr. Mayor Sitma and Alderman. I am Rose Barkey. I believe there is a typo here. Well, I know there's a typo because it's just being moved 10 feet onto the 513 11th Street Northwest property. It's in a low spot on the property, and I want to move it to a new foundation that I have already poured that was approved by the city. So I believe all this, it's not being moved from 1313 27th Street, it's just being moved 10 feet.
Perhaps I might look for a little clarification either from planning or from, and Mitch, I don't believe is here, unfortunately. Mr. City Manager, who can we call up to look for some clarification on this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is Mr. Billingsley here? Would you come on up?
If you would, Rose, hang close and we'll try to find an answer for you here. Okay.
Mayor Sitma, the building official, Mitch Flanagan, is on vacation today, so I'll talk to him about it tomorrow morning when he comes into work. We'll get this clarified at that point.
Thank you, sir. Perhaps, Ms. Barkey,
Yes.
time-sensitive wise, are we looking at, how soon are you looking at moving this?
I have been waiting since the spring.
This spring? Okay. Alderman Straight, you have a question.
Mr. Mayor, I can vouch for that because I've stood in Miss Barkey's garage and I've seen her issues firsthand, and so she's not wrong. We're wrong in our printing of the agenda. Sorry, ma'am.
What would be the correct address for this to be correct, Ms. Barkey?
513 11th Street Northwest.
So, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. City Manager.
That is what the title of the memo did indicate, so we're aware of the move to that particular location. It looks like there might have been a typo in the actual recommendation itself, so we apologize for that. If the council would like to proceed forward with the approval as requested and identified in the title, I think you'd be just fine to do that.
Okay. Then
you'd also want to include the same conditions.
We would have the same conditions as before that are laid out, and as we look through the conditions below on the information, you can see 513 11th Street Northwest is also identified within that. Alderman Straight, did you have any final questions or thoughts?
I was just ready to close the public hearing and move the agenda item with the...
Any further comments?
No, thank you so much.
Thank you. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would move to close the public hearing and follow City Manager Barry's desire to change the, uphold the building relocation request at 513 11th Avenue Street Northwest.
11th Street Northwest. Is that
Yes.
correct? All right.
Second.
We have
with the conditions.
With the conditions?
With the conditions.
All right. We have a motion and a second by Alderman Pittner to close the public hearing to approve at 513 11th Street Northwest here in Minot with the conditions. Any further discussion from the council? Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 8.2 on our agenda is another public hearing, additional animal permit. City ordinance states that no person shall harbor or keep more than 10 animals, of which 10 animals, no more than 4 of them may be cats, dogs, or a combination of cats or dogs unless permit is obtained. Mr. Hutton provided all necessary information as required on the application, and he has submitted the appropriate fee. The animal control officer, Lavero, reviewed the application and inspected the property. It is recommended to the City Council authorize a special use permit to John D. Hutton Jr. to have the 2 additional dogs in excess of the 4 dogs allowed by city ordinance. This is a public hearing, again, an opportunity for anyone to come forward and speak for or against the item that is before us. One more time, this is a public hearing, an opportunity for anyone to come forward. If not, I would look to Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I move we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Motion by Alderman Janser to close the public hearing and move for approval.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. 8.3 on our agenda this evening is the Recruitment Services and Title Revision for the Economic Development Administrator. The Human Resource Department has been unsuccessful in hiring for the position of the Economic Development Specialist, which has been advertised since mid-April. The Human Resource Department has received information from 7 different individuals for the position. However, all applicants lack the required background or experience for the position. As such, the Human Resource Director would like to utilize the recruitment services of an outside firm to assist in the process. Professional recruitment organizations have a wider reach in finding the qualified applicants for government and professional positions, and will have a better capability of finding the best candidate to fill that position. The recommendation is to approve the title revision and using the services of Baker Tilly Vischow Kraus LLP for the recruitment of the Economic Development Administrator position, and to further authorize the mayor to sign the contract on the city's behalf.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson for approval.
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 8.4 on our agenda this evening. Purchase of 805 2nd Avenue Northeast in salvage of house to Kelsey M. Slaughter. The city has reached an agreement with Kelsey M. Slaughter to purchase his house and property for a flood control project. Pursuant to the city acquisition policies and procedures, the agreed-upon acquisition price of $156,000 does not necessitate the city council approval because it is not higher than $15,000 from the city's original offer. However, this is the first purchase which uses salvage of the house as a policy and procedure, and therefore is prudent to seek the city council approval. The recommendation of the city council approve the purchase of 805 2nd Avenue for a price of $156,000 minus the salvage value of $13,859 for a net purchase price of $142,141, and authorize the mayor and city official also needed to execute all documents necessary to complete the purchase, and authorize the seller, Kelsey M. Slaughter, to reacquire the house and relocate it.
Move approval.
Motion to approve by Alderman Pittner.
Second.
Second by Alderman Straight. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 8.5, the expiring land lease with Minot Aviation. Minot Aviation, also known as the Aeroport Hobby Shop, leases Lot 1, Block 1, the west side 40-foot, Lot 4, north 60-foot, and Lot 5, located at the Minot International Airport. The term of the current lease expires on January 31st, 2020. Per the terms of the current lease, the city is required to notify Minot Aviation at least 120 days in advance prior to the expiration of the base lease if it does not intend to renew or extend. Under the current lease, the city owns the land and Minot Aviation owns the improvements, which includes an airplane hangar and attached commercial space. The current monthly rent for the land is $250 per month, or $3,000 a year. Due to the reasons described in the attached memo, city staff is recommending the city council not renew or extend the current lease with Minot Aviation. The recommendation to council is to adopt the recommendations of the airport director not to renew or extend Minot Aviation's current land lease, which expires January 31st, 2019, and direct the airport director to move forward with all actions necessary to wind up the present lease with Minot Aviation. That should read January 31st, 2020, not January 31st, 2019. Right. On the recommendation. That was in the handout. Looking for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, if I may speak.
Let's get a motion first, and then we'll take public comment.
Mayor, move approval.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Straight. Please come forward.
Thank you.
If you would, your name for the record, too.
Mr. Mayor, my name is Bob Martin. I'm the attorney representing Ava and Stuart Lucky, who are the owners of Mott Aviation and the Airport Hobby Shop. I want to first of all thank you for the little bit of extra time that you gave me. I am going to keep it closer to 5 than to 10 as we discussed. The Luckies have been doing business as Minot Aviation in the hobby shop since 1982 and 1985, respectively, at that location. They've had the leasehold with the city and the airport for 37 years. And as you said, the city owns the ground, they own the building, which is, as you appropriately said as well, an airport hangar with an attached retail space. They've never been late with a rental payment or a tax payment, and retail stores are not uncommon in airport parks across the nation. They received a letter from Mr. Feltner indicating that there had to be an inspection of the premises, and I negotiated with the city manager's office, I believe, for the date of May 16th. The inspection was conducted, including a fire inspection, and the letter that was sent to us from the city indicated that any problems noted with the operation would be raised at that time. Nothing was raised. There were no problems indicated. Then on July 11th of 2019, the letter that is part of the current packet before the city council received notice that the lease is going to be terminated and recommend to you to terminate the lease because of non-aviation use of the building. There was reference in the letter to inoperable planes and a washer and dryer being on the property and in the rental building. Excuse me, on the building that is on the rental property. If I could impose upon Derek to run a brief video, I have a short video to show you. I'm going to follow some very short.
Good evening.
There we go. Thank you. It's 4:30 p.m. approximately on February 2nd, 2019. We're at the rear of Minot Aviation Building at the Minot Airport Complex. My name's Bob Martin. I'm the attorney representing Stuart and Ava Lucky. Present taking the video is Nolan Johnson of Quantum Productions. And for the record, both Stuart Lucky and Clint Mavis have been sworn if any testimony or, questions are elicited during the course of the video. We're here to show that Minot Aviation's hangar is being used for aviation-related purposes. This is one of the airplanes that was referred to as inoperable. It's running. The planes have been taken out of storage for purposes of showing that they are indeed operable and operating. For the record, the first plane's serial number is 3385. This plane is N96430. This is Stuart Lucky, one of the signers of the lease for Minot Aviation, one of the owners of Minot Aviation. Along with the two planes that were just fired up for the video purposes, there are 3 other airplanes in the back of the hangar that you can see here, which are also operable but needing minor repairs, such as an oil filter. There are 2 other planes that are in different states of construction. The hangar is used for a number of things that are aviation not just the storage of operable aircraft, but also used for the manufacturing of specialty airplane parts and experimental airplane parts. Let's lock down one side of the experimental area. Stuart, as we walk through, can you quickly explain some of the airplane manufacturing? This would be like tools and replacement parts, is that correct?
Yes, but basically for whole airplanes. They're whole airplanes. There's many things we're not showing you here.
We're under a time constraint, sorry about that. We only have 5 minutes.
I know. These are parts here that have been handmade for airplanes. We have other pictures of them. Fuselage is completed. Fuselage is completed.
And these are parts you manufacture yourself right here
Yes.
in the hangar at Minot Aviation.
Yes. I have a phenomenal amount of parts and pictures. As the years have passed, we've been here 37 years. It's a long time.
It was mentioned in the city's report regarding a washer, a clothes washer, and a shower that are upstairs. What's the purpose for those? Why are those in this hangar?
Well, we've been here for 37 years, and we sprayed here for 24, I believe it is. So we stayed here, and we had a shower and so forth.
You had to
here.
get the chemicals off, basically.
Well, it's to clean up, yes.
Okay, let's take a walk through the front of the shop area. Referred to as the hobby shop. If you'll take notice of the radio-controlled planes, the rockets, arguably all aviation related, but perhaps more importantly is when they get over to this central area here, you can see the drones. Just go ahead and pass that over to Clint. Thank you. Clint, you sell drones here. Not just sell, you also engage in a teaching program with the drones.
Yep, out in Tioga, North Dakota, it's been every year now for about 5 years.
And is that an FAA sanctioned program?
It is.
Clint, thank you for your time, sir.
No
Thank
problem.
you for your time, Stuart. As I think, they always say one picture's worth 1,000 words. It seemed an appropriate way to address the council about what's actually going on in this building. The back is used to store airplanes. It's a hangar. Not only store airplanes, but store running airplanes. To manufacture especially airplane parts and experimental aircraft. It's clearly aviation related. The washer and dryer does not make this a living space. It makes it a place we have to wash chemicals off after operating a spray plane. The front end of the property is what they refer to as the hobby shop, and as you've seen with your own eyes, it concerns radio-controlled aircraft, rocketry, and drone operation, and even a teaching of a program that's FAA sanctioned. I submit to you that every aspect of the business in this facility is aviation related. And for whatever reason the city seems to think otherwise, excuse me, I should say Mr. Feltner, seems to think otherwise, that the evidence before you shows that to terminate this lease on the basis of non-aviation related activity would be arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable. What we would like to see happen, and I might add also, there's a lease here. Lease binds both parties, not just my clients, but the city as well. Paragraph 19 of the lease talks about correction of error or default. If this is viewed by you as the operation of a non-aviation related activity in the hobby shop, we'd request formal notice of that and the opportunity to cure by removal of the hobby shop from the premises as specified in the lease. But to outright just terminate this lease because supposedly it's not aviation related is not supported by the evidence before this council. I thank you for your time. Any questions for me
Thank you,
before I sit
Mr.
down?
Martin. Any questions from the council? Alderman Pontagula.
Do the planes actually fly?
Yes. Yes, they do.
Okay, thank you.
The ones that were running and the ones that are relating for minor repairs. There are 2 out of the 7 planes that have major repair work being done on the engine and the wings. So 2 out of the 7 are not flyable or operable.
Thanks, Bob.
Mr. Feltner, if we could bring you forward and quite a few different items that Mr. Martin had brought up, aside from the legal aspect of the jargon. If you could just expound on yours a little bit, sir.
Sure. If I could, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have this on the agenda, and as I've mentioned before, I would be here tonight to give you the results of the airport-wide audit of the land leases that we have there, and Derek's got my presentation, so I think it might be helpful if I went through the presentation first, and it was kind of odd where we were going to put this on the agenda because I have 2 action items, one regarding Minot Aviation and one regarding Aviation Services at the end of the presentation. So if you will indulge me, I will go through the process that we went through to make these determinations, and then I'd be happy to expound on Minot Aviation in particular, and also Aviation Services if you have any questions. Would that be acceptable?
Please continue.
Okay. So we put together a program where we were going to go through and inspect all of the leased space. And as has been mentioned, they're a little bit unique because the leased space, the airport owns the property, and in most cases, the tenants own the building. And these are long-term leases typically. And they've been made over a number of years, and there's not a lot of consistency. So we'll go through here. I will give you the background on what we did. I will give you the process on what we did. I will show you the results, and then we'll get to the 2 action items that I'm asking for this evening. So as a bit of background as to the city and the airport's role with Minot International Airport, and many of you know this, but for the public, Minot is the airport sponsor, which means we're responsible for administering the federally obligated enterprises that are run at the airport. We report to and have responsibility for upholding a number of different regulations, but primarily from the FAA. And these are grant assurances that we agree to. So when I come up here and tell you that the FAA has offered us, as in this year, $2 million for various capital improvement projects, those dollars come with certain strings, if you will, in the form of grant assurances. And while there are a number of them, several of them come into play here with general aviation in particular, as opposed to commercial aviation or other things that may be relevant. So for general aviation, one of our responsibilities is for promoting general aviation and reserving hangar space for land use for aeronautical purposes consistent with our airport layout plan. Our airport layout plan is part of our master plan, and it identifies which parts of the airport should be specifically for aeronautical purposes, and those parts of the airport where non-aeronautical activities may take place. All of the areas where the hangars are, obviously, are part of the aeronautical space. So we have 27 land leases, and again, the airport owns the land, the tenant owns the improvements, which in this case are hangars. Like I said, they're long-term leases, and we have not done a comprehensive inspection in recent memory. So we sent letters to, and I'll get to that in just a second, we sent letters to all of the tenants explaining what we were going to do. The pictures in this presentation are not stock photos. These are photos taken from the inspections that we did at various locations. So just to orient yourself about what we're looking at here on the, if I have a cursor I can move around, I think I do. So this area to the north, the north area on North Broadway here. So We looked at these hangars here, and then all of these hangars down in this area, and then in the South GA area, and you can see and here's the blow up of that area. So we looked at all of these hangars, and everything down this row here. And then on the South GA, these are box hangars that have been put up. This Google Earth image is old. If you were to blow it out, you would see that the old terminal is still there. So it's not exactly new. So since this picture was taken, there are a couple more hangars and some in construction as well. So we looked at all of these hangars as well. All of the tenants were sent a letter explaining the inspection and inviting them to set an appointment, going over what was going to happen during this inspection. There were 3 components. There was fire, there was building, and then compliance with the airport lease. So all of these different entities entered all 27 of these buildings and took a look. And then after we were done, we sent individual letters to each tenant, letting them know how things went, if there were any issues, and anything that needed to be corrected. So the great news is that it really looked good. I was very pleased with the results of this inspection. 23 out of the 27 properties there were either in full compliance or just had minor things that needed to be corrected. There were 2 buildings that were determined by the building inspector to be structurally unsound and unsafe and needed some pretty immediate action taken. I would say that those also had some questionable aeronautical purposes. Those folks had longer-term leases with curative periods, and we are in a curative period with those. So I'm not here tonight to ask you to take any action with those because we're in the process of trying to work through those. But then there were 2 properties that were determined not to be in compliance as having an aeronautical purpose as defined by the FAA. So now we get to the next steps, and you've already seen these. And what I want to make sure we're clear on here is that the airport is not asking to terminate any lease. We are not looking to do that. The lease term expires on January 31st, 2020, and it requires 120 days notice from the airport in order to we're required to give 120 days notice to the tenant if we're not intending to renew that lease. So time is somewhat of an issue here, and we want to give everybody as much time to work through this as possible. But the bottom line is this, that a hobby shop, whether it sells model airplanes and drones and radio-controlled cars and boats or models or whatever, is not an aeronautical purpose for that. As determined by the FAA, that is not an aeronautical purpose. If they run a club that is supported by the FAA, that is a separate issue from whatever is in their lease. Their lease states that it needs to be an aeronautical purpose. With regard to the hangar area in the back, there is some discretion on the part of the airport there. I will say that just because an airplane starts doesn't make it airworthy, but it has certainly been our experience that the aircraft there are not active. We don't see them coming out of the hangar hardly ever. They don't really participate in the general aviation community there. And that really gets to the heart of what we're trying to do. We're trying to attract and promote businesses that have to do with aviation. We're an airport. We look at kind of 3 things, aeronautical purpose. I think we talked about that a little bit with the hobby shop and where that fits. We also want to look at the highest and best use of the facility. Does it fit with the plan of promoting aviation? Are people flying? Are they learning to fly? Are they buying gas? Are they selling services that other pilots want to buy. And then third, and really important, is being consistent and fair with all the other leaseholders. So out of the 27 leases, 24 are in full compliance, and that means that they've got active airplanes in their hangar. They're not filled with items that are not related to immediate flying. And the FAA does state that, indefinite storage of inactive aircraft and aircraft parts is not an aeronautical purpose. And so that's kind of where we are today. So the last thing I would say about this one is that we're not asking to terminate the lease. We are requesting that we not renew it when the time comes up, and that we look for a better use of that space.
Thank you, Mr. Feldner. Any questions for our airport director at this time? Alderman Straight. I would like to get questions from the council first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Well, Mr. Feltner, I'm curious, at one time, did the FFA or the FAA view the current uses happening via Aviation Services as acceptable uses, and that policy has just changed and evolved?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Straight, I don't know. I don't think so. I think that these grant assurances have been somewhat consistent over the years. As was mentioned, this is a 30, there's been an association for 30 years, and I couldn't tell you what happened over that time. And like I said, a lot of these leases are very long-term. So while I'm not positive, I believe there was the last lease was a 20-year lease, which expired in 2016. There was, with my predecessor, there was some legal action taken, and this was tied up in court with regard to the lease that they were offered at the time. That was not resolved until approximately December of 2018. Then in 2019, we offered them a one-year lease consistent with what was offered them in 2016, 2015, 2016. And now that lease, that one-year lease, is coming to an end, and this is where we would like to part ways.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
Alderman Wolski.
Thank you, Mr. Feltner. If we were to approve letting this lease expire as recommended, by what process will we issue or approve a new tenant? Is that an open process that anybody is able to apply for?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, yes. So obviously it would not be appropriate for us to try and market this until we have resolution on this question. But yes, it's a process between the airport. The FAA needs to get involved and approve, and certainly City Council would have to approve any lease that I would bring forward.
One follow-up, Mr. Mayor.
Continue.
Mr. Feldner, would Minot Aviation be available to reapply for a lease at that particular time under different terms?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, certainly.
Further questions for our airport director? Just one from me, Mr. Feltner. At $250 a month, has that been the longstanding rent rate? And is that comparable to what else is out?
Well,
general vicinity?
Mr. Mayor, that part of what we're talking about here is that obviously that's a very low amount, and the purpose for the low amount is to try and promote aviation. So it helps the tenant amortize their building over a long period of time, but it also allows for the development of aviation-related purposes. So you're right, $250 a month, that has gone up, I think, over the last couple of years. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact amount, but I think they used to pay somewhat less than that. But they've got 10,000 square feet, $250 a month, so that comes up to $3,000 a year. And for this retail space in this big hangar.
Any further questions for our airport director? Thank you, Rick. Mr. Martin, you had a follow-up.
You have a question for Mr. Feltner. Mr. Feltner, am I to understand that the FAA...
If you could, Mr. Martin, address the council, and we will then address Mr. Feltner.
Sorry, I don't get up here very often. I'm more used to a courtroom.
I can tell that.
My apologies, and I'm also sorry about my phone going off. I feel like an idiot. I warned everybody else here to turn theirs off. In any event, I'm curious as to whether or not Mr. Feltner on 2 points. First of all, he tells you that the FAA says such and such. I would like to know if the situation of Minot Aviation has been forwarded to the FAA, if there's been an investigation conducted, if there's been a determination at an agency level that housing running airplanes, manufacturing experimental aircraft, and formerly running a spraying operation are not, quote, aviation related. Secondly, I would like to ask, I'd like to make a clarification with respect to the lease interest. He said they had a 20-year lease. They did not. Minot Aviation entered into litigation, or rather the city entered into litigation with Minot Aviation back in 2005. There was an attempt made at that time to evict them, break the lease and evict them. That case dragged on in district court for over a year, and in fact had to be assigned to a judge out of Williston because no one local would get involved. The judges all recused themselves. And all that happened with that case was after a year, the judge dismissed it. And that was in 2005. Since that point in 2005, it had basically been a month-to-month leasehold. There was no formal lease reoffered to Minot Aviation until the one-year lease of 2016 was offered. And at that point, I don't know how much you know about the prior litigation, but the concern is that Ms. Lucky felt that she and one other person were being, well, that she was being singled out. The one other person was Mr. Anderson, who apparently is your next action item as well, to be basically removed from this area, from the lease. And the differences, the discrepancies, Mr. Anderson has a portable building. My clients have a brick and mortar hangar that's been there for 37 years. This has been a long-going and a long operating business and has gone on without a hitch with respect to the FAA, and now all of a sudden we have this happening. Like I said, a lease binds both parties. I would like you, at the very least, to give Ms. Lucky an opportunity to come into compliance. And it almost seems to me what we're talking about, they say no action should be without purpose. So we don't renew Minot Aviation's lease, but they're free to reapply for a lease for the same building that they've been at for 37 years, provided it's aviation related. Well, don't we have a cart before the horse situation? If they remove the non-conforming, if you deem it to be that, I mean, promoting aviation, what gets kids interested in becoming pilots? RC aircraft, drones, rockets, and sanctioned by the FAA. But I would like to make those two clarifications. And again, thank you for your time.
Mr. Martin, I just do have one question, and that was, you had actually left the dais prior, but when was the last time one of those planes actually flew?
I would have to defer to my clients if I could. I'm not certain.
Okay.
Last November, November of 2018. October, November of 2018.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Feldner, follow-up perhaps on the question that was raised.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of council, with regard to the first question, FAA involvement, yes, I have been in contact with the FAA about this, and we've had a number of discussions, and there are kind of 2 points. One is that certainly the hobby shop portion of this property does not meet an aeronautical purpose. And if there were to be some agreement where they could operate as a hobby shop, a couple things would happen. First, the FAA would have to make an exception and grant them that. And their reasoning for that would tend to be, if you're going to put a non-aeronautical business in an aeronautical space, would be, is there not a higher and better purpose aeronautically for that space? So if there's, there's no other use for it, and it's the only way that any income is generated for the airport, that they might be willing to do that. So if you got past that hurdle and did that, there would have to be a completely separate kind of lease that would be a concession type lease. So it would be similar to the type of lease that we have for food and beverage, for car rentals, for fuel sales, that sort of thing. And that sort of lease is quite different than what they have now. So there would have to be a new lease completely, and the airport would, be required by the FAA to charge market street rates for retail space, so there would have to be an evaluation of what the market rate would be, and the FAA would have to approve that new rate. And then secondly, the airport would have an obligation to share in that revenue. So just like we do with the fuel and the concessions and everything else, there would be a certain percentage of those retail sales that would go to the airport. But that none of that is contained in the current lease. And again, I just want to reiterate that the current lease expires January 31st. So there is a lease now, January 31st, there is not a lease. So we're not terminating a lease. Secondly, with regard to the history of this, I have done some research, but I'm certainly probably not as fluent in it as our city attorney or Mr. Martin, or I see that Jim Hadlett's in the back of the room, who was on the head of the airport committee for many, many years. And so there's probably some more knowledge about the length of the lease than I have. I can tell you that everything kind of stayed status quo during the litigation period. And then, like I said, the one-year lease went into effect in the beginning of 2019 for 1 year.
Any follow-up questions for our airport director? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Just maybe a little bit of information. I'm not very fluent in airplanes. What's in your guys' aviation community up there? How often do people fly their planes that have aircraft stored up there? I mean, we're coming up on a year since it flown. I don't know, is that common? Is that?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Pittner, it varies. The pictures that I took in here that I put in the presentation were kind of typical, and you can see that airplanes appear to be in a good state of repair. I'm not an airplane mechanic, and I can't determine what's airworthy and what's not, but we have a pretty good idea of which airplanes are in and out of hangars quite a bit. And the vast majority of them are active, and that's really the key word that we're looking for here, are active in the general aviation community. And because, obviously an airport is the only place that you can operate aircraft. An airport is not the only place that you could operate a retail business.
Alderman Potter-Gula.
I wanted to ask a question about the spraying. I guess I'd forgotten about that, but when I've driven by the airport in the old days, there was a sprayer, at least one sprayer there, I think a yellow one. Is this spraying business active at this point?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Potter-Gula, absolutely. The spray company there is active during the ag season, but they rent that hangar and prepare for the next season. So yeah, they're there.
But is that this hangar?
No, that's not this hangar.
Oh,
no, there's nothing. No, there's no spray business going on out of this hangar.
Okay.
There's just the one just to the north of it has
Thank
a
you.
spray operation.
Further questions? Thank you, Rick. Further discussion from the council on the issue before us to terminate the lease.
Not renew.
I'm sorry, not terminate the lease, non-renew the lease. Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Please come forward to the dais and say your name, please.
I'm Eva Lucky.
Can you speak into the microphone so we can hear you?
I own Aeroport Hobby Shop. Anyway, this is kind of difficult because I have been there 37 years. all the airport managers knew we were there. We have done airplane rental, we have done crop spraying, experimental air shows, many aviation-related experiences. So the hobby shop has been something that I've been doing because I always wanted to learn to fly. In fact, I took flying lessons, but was afraid of crashing, so I didn't want to die. But anyway, through the years, we promoted aviation. I was one of the first, I had all the certificates from the EPA, Part 137 for spraying. I'm very well educated. We had a really good business. We have a clean record. We don't owe any back taxes. We pay our taxes, and we're good to people. We have helped the school systems with their science and rocket programs. With flying, we have had people who have learned to fly with a radio control and then have become pilots. And through the last 4 or 5 years, we've been involved with Tioga, with a drone school camp for kids, where they bring 5th graders to 12th grade and teach them how to fly the drones, safety for 2 days, and then they get a free drone. We have George, Max, and Clint, and myself. We all teach that class. And we encourage in all safety, and we hand out pamphlets with the safety regulations. So I don't know what else, we can do at this time. Another thing, there is also those other buildings next to our building, and one is used just for storage. There hasn't been an airplane flying there for years. And that's right next to, there's 2 buildings where nothing happened, absolutely nothing. There's just storage. And when they, about a few years ago, when they gave me a lease, they compared it to Fred Anderson, who's Aviation Services, who had a T hangar, which is falling apart, which got dirt floors, which is nothing to do with our building. And I just very puzzled that all this, and also Dunbus has a shower, a washer, a dryer in their building. A lot of people do. They store cars right in that nice big terminal that Peach had facing north. They had cars, they had boats, they had all kinds of stuff there. So I do not understand what is, what can I do to make it more aeronautical? We have been asked by the FAA a symposium to explain about drones and flying and safety. George and Clint and Max, we have been to the Lions Club. We educate the community on flying. So that's all I wanted to say, unless you have a question.
Any questions? Alderman Patagula.
The airport director said that he's spoken with the FAA and there are serious concerns about compliance with what the FAA requires. And I think your attorney said that you'd be willing to deal with the hobby shop portion of your business and perhaps relocate it or whatever. And the airport director has pointed out that if it were to be allowed to continue, it'd have to be operated on a concession basis like the other concessions at the airport, with the city taking some percentage of the profits. Is that something you'd be willing to explore, is to come into compliance, to maybe take the planes out once a month and fly them a little bit?
Oh, absolutely.
And to renegotiate the terms of the shop if that would be approved by the FAA?
Yeah, I would have to discuss it with my attorney, but it certainly would be something I would think about it. One thing I remember now, they talk about my building not bringing enough revenue. For the quarter of the second quarter sales tax, I sent to the state over $5,000 just on sales tax. 2.5 of that goes to the city of Minot. I pay my taxes also. The other buildings, the other leases, they don't pay a lot of money for their leases. I read them a while back unless they changed them, but they pay very little money. So I don't know why they're singling me out that I don't pay enough money. But if they raise it, I pay it. I have never been behind, always paid it. But I would certainly consider, I'm open to, I have to talk to my attorney and Stuart and decide what we need to do. I certainly would like to work with you guys. I mean, that is an option.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, ma'am. Further discussion?
Mayor Sittman, may I have an opportunity to speak? I know this is kind of
Let's keep them brief now. Please come forward and
2 minutes.
name for the record, please.
My name is David Colness, and I'm the president of the Minot Aircraft Modelers. We're a nonprofit organization in the community that supported responsible model aviation in the community and the surrounding areas for over 30 years. Obviously, we're patrons of the Airport Hobby Shop, and the Airport Hobby Shop has supported our nonprofit in numerous ways over the years. To say that, hey, let me just back up and say that there can be little debate that the fastest growing sector in aviation, both military and in many, many areas of civil aviation, is UAS, unmanned aerial systems, drones, if you will. The FAA is slowly, we know the speed of the federal government. The FAA and our governing body, the AMA, are in lobbying Congress. They are changing the FAA's special rule for model aviation. Changes are on the horizon. If it's this year, if it's next year, if it's 5 years or 10 years from now, I don't know. But to say that model aviation and drones are not an aviation-specific activity is somewhat short-sighted, and I believe is an old way of thinking, and it is changing. Look at agriculture, look at police. One of the videos you showed up here of your construction was drone footage. That's how the next generation of aviators gets interested in aviation, is model aircraft. My son's one of them. My son started out, became a member of the club when we moved here with the Air Force 7-8 years ago, and now he's taking flight lessons. And I see it with other children as well, and adults, not just the kids. But and I know that the Lucky's lawyer said it. That's how you get the next generation interested, and that really and truly is true. And to put it bluntly, if this lease is not continued, you're probably going to push the Airport Hobby Shop out of business. It's the only business of this type in the Minot area. The next closest is Mandan or Grand Forks. I believe that this is a mistake for the aviation community in the Minot area and for the Minot city. So, any questions for me?
Any questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Please come forward with your name and also if we can keep it brief.
Ladies and gentlemen of the council, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate you letting me come up here and give you my 2 cents worth, but I've been a hobbyist since I was 10 years old. I'm 88 years old now, and right now I'm building a pretty good scale model of a B-52.
Sir,
And
if
I've
you don't
got
mind.
several models that I've built.
Sir.
My question to you guys is, If you close this business down, which is a tax-paying outfit, that means I've got to go out of state or out of town. The closest town would be Grand Forks. They get the tax money. Or the out-of-state companies get the tax money. And I have spent over $3,000 since Evo opened her shop. I'm just one guy. You got a whole slug of them up here, and that's just a tenth of the people that belong to the Minded Aircraft Modelers. I worked for EVA for a few years, too. And I enjoyed talking to the Canadians that came down to shop, because that's the only place they could come from to get supplies. And people from Dickinson, Williston, Rugby, Parshall. Oh, I could go on forever, I guess. The towns that people come here to buy her supplies. You shut her down, you kick her out of business. And I think I read a couple of months ago that the city of Minot is behind in their tax collecting money. Now, why would we want to close a tax-paying business down? Can't the airport utilize some of that property that they own besides this little bit? That hangar isn't big enough to have another latrine built into it, let alone having the, building a big building like he's talking about. You people were talking about the old terminal property here not too many months ago. Can't it be used for this palace this guy wants to build? That's all I have to question.
Sir, can I have your name, please? What is your name, sir?
I'm hard of hearing.
What is your name, sir?
Joseph Charles Prairie. I live at 800 25th Avenue, and Stephen over there is my... Hello, Steve.
Any questions?
Thank you, sir.
Northwest Minot.
questions?
I've lived there since 1971.
Thank you, sir.
That's all I got. Thank you.
Mr. Setma, I got a real quick one here.
Good, because my patience is also running a little bit short. Your name for the record,
My
please.
name is Wayne Marshall. I'm on the board of the Minded Aircraft Modelers also. There's a lot of talk about being the airport hobby shop not being FFA. We have 30 to 40 members in our group and everything, and every single one of us have to have an FFA license. We all have one. So there's 30 to 40 people so I don't know how you can say it's not aviation related. We all have to have FFA, and we can pull out our cards and prove it. So that's why I say I don't understand why they're saying that the airport hobby shop is not aviation related. And Minot is talking about, online and all that, spend money here in Minot. She's the only one in Minot that offers parts, airplanes, cars. She's the only one. Hobby Lobby, nobody's got what she's got. So in other words, we'd end up going to Bismarck, to Grand Forks or whatever, or online to spend our money. I'd rather spend my money. I worked for Shields for 27 years, and I know what it's like to spend money in Minot. I want to keep the business here in Minot. That's why I say I think she should stay there, and I support her 100%. That's all I got.
Al Peach was a member of our club at one time.
If we can keep the chatter down, please, thank you. Discussion from the council. Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not one for biting my tongue, but I have to say from just the standpoint of $250 in month of rent is a concern to me. I think most people that pay attention to chiding us for various things, I think that's something that clearly has to be addressed. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with the idea that we need an aviation hobby shop and that it's important. I'm thinking of Mr. Ron Merritt sitting in the audience. The Park District is going to build out with their partners the Minot Children's Museum. Clearly, we need to have a hobby shop in town. I think the larger question is whether we need a hobby shop right here at this location. And I think that's obviously where this discussion has entered into it. I clearly recognize the need for one. I just question whether we need to have it right here at this spot. And I know because of the rent being $250, everybody up here, I can look across at Mr. Pittner, and I'm sure he would love to have a space that, I hate to use the word subsidized by government officials, but at $250 a month, That's ultimately what is happening. And I'm not debating the uses. My nephews were just in town. They participated in the air show. They have models at Boy Scouts. It's clearly a need. I would love to see the continued partnership, obviously, with the Children's Museum and STEM and science and technology for our youth. I just think being stewards of our tax dollars and what's happening with the future of aeronautics and at our state-of-the-art new airport, this is one that has to change, and it's a sad, tough vote, sir, but that's why we're elected.
Further discussion. Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. My comments will mean very little at the end of the night after I cast my vote on this. But at the very least, we have this podium and this pulpit. We have a very important Minot business. I am always conscious of actions up here that discourage business or discourage entrepreneurs or discourage passionate individuals from seeking opportunities available in this community. And so I want to use this moment as sort of an all call to people in Minot. If this vote is ultimately successful, we have a long-standing business here, and I'm very hopeful, and I will work to knock on doors and see if we can find a location for it somewhere here, because I do want it to survive, but I do believe it's time to modernize the operations of the airport.
Alderman Pontegula.
I'm very much torn on this issue, and partly because I've spent a good deal of time with Rick Feltner, our airport director, talking about it privately. And I was persuaded very quickly as to the usefulness, the validity of what the city was trying to do. However, at that point, I was not aware of the explanation for some of the discrepancies, the washer, dryer, the shower, things like that. I was not aware that the planes were operational, and whether they fly or not is a different matter. And I don't want to be seen as pulling out the rug from under a staff member, senior staff member who I said I would support. And I still support the idea of making sure that we're in FAA compliance, because without that, we would be at terrible risk in terms of our funding. So I think if this facility is to be there, it has to be compliant. I'm concerned, as Alderman Straight was, about the finances. I rent a storage unit, I think it's 8 by 15 for $154 a month. I just got the bill today. I would love to have a 10,000-foot storage building for $250, believe me. So, we certainly don't want to penalize a longstanding business, a business that pays its taxes, a business that has a coterie of supporters. What I'm leaning toward is seeing if they can come to a deal on this. I'm also very concerned about the fact that there's an attorney here who uses words like arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable. Those are not just dog whistles. They are sirens to me, and I think our attorney's ears are probably perking up too. So I'm anticipating that there would be some legal action, and I'm not sure that I want to expose the city to that. I don't know what, how firmly we stand on this legally, and we really can't talk about that in an open session. But my expectation is that they will be suing us. And I think it's prudent for me to have that expectation unless disabused of that notion by our attorney. So, I am troubled by this. I think they have to get their act in order. And I would like to see them, for example, maybe given 6 months to do that, and that make sure that all the FAA rules are applicable. That we move toward a concession for the business, a concession model. I don't think it's fair to subsidize them. I think, from my perspective, it does seem pretty aviation related. There should be. I think it's worth exploring more carefully whether we can come to some sort of a deal on this. So my temptation would be to give them 6 months and say, get your act together, make sure the planes are flying, make sure you comply with all the FAA regulations, and enter into a contract like all the other businesses at the airport. I have some new facts coming before me today, and I'm sort of in the role of trier of fact in a sense here, and I'm just uncomfortable with either option. I don't think we can tolerate something that doesn't meet the regulations. On the other hand, the owner has expressed a desire to try to work things out, and I think we should take them up on their offer for a limited period of time.
Thank you, Alderman Pontegula. I think City Manager Barry has some information to pass along.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Padragula, just maybe for the benefit of the full council, if you choose not to, if you choose not to give notice to terminate the lease, then the lease will automatically renew for another year's period, just so you're aware. Notice not to renew. Does that make sense? So if you don't give a notice not to renew, the lease, based on Section 3, has an option that will automatically allow for it to take place for another full year. You'll be stuck with another year's term.
Is there some mechanism to renew it only for 6 months at this point?
Not in the existing lease. The only way I think you can get that is to do a lease modification, but that would require the agreement of the tenant.
Excuse me. May I address the council on this point?
We got to finish with.
I know I'm way over my 10 minutes. But
Mr. Martin, if we keep it short, I have some final comments as well.
I said a lease binds both parties. Both parties can agree to modify the terms of the lease. My client's indicated she's willing to work with you to do that. You needn't to worry about the automatic provision kicking in. If we're talking about, we can sign a memorandum of intent tomorrow to modify the lease, to bring it into compliance with the FAA requirements and to make it a franchise business with the city. She's been there a long time, ladies and gentlemen. Let her stay.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Mr. Mayor?
Alderman Olson.
The way that I would understand this is that we could still take action tonight, and there would still be a time period in which they could start having these discussions, and they could start considering a new lease if the business was brought into FAA standards and such. So I don't think that we're completely closing the door by taking action tonight. I think that there is still a time period in which a new lease could be considered. But right now, knowing that we have a clock ticking on this, I think it's important that we do take action tonight.
City Manager Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Olson is absolutely correct. And Alderman Wolski made a very good, astute point, which is also to say that if this was to expire and the city wanted to negotiate a new lease with whoever it could be, this company could also be in the running for that as well. So the time period by which this business could come back to the city can start now and continue through what possibly, depending upon your decision, could be a period of request for proposals for a new lease, for example.
Alderman Padragula.
I'd like to offer, I don't know if it's a substitute motion or amendment to this motion, to give them 6 months, time certain, to work something out. Otherwise, the attorney has offered to modify it. I'd like to see them have a period of time. I think 4 months is not sufficient. I would be more comfortable if they had 6 months, and if they can't work it out to the satisfaction of the city, they're gone.
Attorney Hendershot.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Padragula, first, I think that was made as a motion to amend, but I think that would probably more suited as a separate motion. But in addition, if after the first motion is the vote is taken. Secondly, I think what you're saying, Alderman Padragula, is that you're wanting to basically amend the lease by motion. We would have to do that through written agreement, as is indicated in the lease, and the other party would have to consent to that too, and that written amendment would come back to the council for review. We can't, by motion, extend or incorporate this 6-month time period for them to come into compliance.
Could we ask you to renegotiate the lease then?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Padragula, you could request that staff work to amend the lease. However, as City Manager Barry indicated, the 120 days is a firm dates or time periods that set in the lease. And so if that notice isn't given by that time frame, then, which I believe is October of 2019, if it's not given within that time frame, then it's an automatic renewal for another year beginning January 30th, 2020, of the current terms of the lease.
So we would have to give them notice under the current lease by October 1st.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Padragula, I believe it's the end of October.
120 days.
End of August.
End of August? Okay, August 30th, excuse me. I'm sorry.
So we'd have to give them notice by August 30 that we're not renewing.
Yes.
Okay.
I think at this point, I will actually just weigh in on this issue. It's not whether or not we understand that the hobby shop is a viable business that has played an integral part within the hobby, whether it be drones or hobby planes or other hobby activities that are sold there. It's a compliance issue with the FAA, to which annually we have millions of dollars that are tied into our international airport and projects that also go along with general aviation. I look at this as the opportunity for both parties to have the policy or have the contract expire and to get us into compliance as a city with the FAA, and whether or not the FAA would allow then a change in how they view the hobby shop. But right now, under those guidelines, it's no different than every other federal program that we have either administered through CDBG or NDR or any other federal highway monies. We're tied to the obligations set forth by those federal agencies, and that's really what this comes down to. And that's what we're voting here tonight. Now, whether or not those negotiations can take place and a new contract after the expiration or within that time frame, a workable scenario for a different contract. That would be between staff and between the other parties. But what we are looking at right now is what's before us of the current contract and our current regulations set by the FAA. And whether I agree that drones and hobbies that relate to aerospace are related to flight, that may be my opinion, but it's not what the FAA guidelines really are. Further discussion. Further discussion.
Mr. Mayor, can you just clarify the motion?
The motion is to, what you see on the recommendations, adopt the recommendation of the airport director not to renew or extend the Monad Aviation current land lease, which expires January 31, 2019.
I've got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Alderman Padrigula.
If we approve this motion, would it be in order then to introduce another motion to direct city staff to work with the current lessee to see if this could be brought into compliance in a subsequent lease?
I think we can do that without a motion. Just direct staff.
I would ask that we do that then, because I think it's really important. I share completely the idea that we, and accept the notion we have to be in compliance. I guess I just feel uncomfortable about ending a relationship that's existed for 37 years without giving people an adequate chance to try to fix it. And they've expressed their willingness to fix it. I'm willing to support the motion. I'm willing to stand behind city staff. But I also wanted clear that we are directing our staff to do their best to renegotiate this.
Further discussion on the motion? Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Bittner,
Yes.
Padrigula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 8.6, the month-to-month lease termination for Aviation Services Incorporated, whose contact is Mr. Fred Anderson, lease land located at the Minot International Airport, identified more specifically as West Lot 49 on a month-to-month basis. The original term of the lease expires in 2008. Under the term of the original agreement, the airport owns the land, the Aviation Services owns the improvements, to which include an airplane T-hangar. The current monthly rent for the land is $32.33 per month, or $387.91 per year. Due to the reasons described in the attached memo, city staff is recommending that the council terminate the month-to-month land lease with Aviation Services Incorporated.
Move approval.
Motion to approve by Alderman Olson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Straight. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Alderman
I
Patergula.
wanted to ask the airport director what the current status is of attempts to reach the is it lessor or lessee? The guy who's renting the thing from us, Mr. Anderson, and if we've been able to contact him and he's been able to give us some satisfaction of what we have to have with the FAA.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Padragula, yes, I have been in contact with Mr. Anderson. He received the letters, but I also had an extended phone call with him not too long ago. You know, the issue here is that this is, I believe you've got a picture of it there. This is, have you guys seen this?
I don't think we have it up on the screen.
Derek, can you please bring up the pictures? I'll flip through here. It's the other one. The other one, Derek. Okay, so this is, oh, you had it. So this is the picture of the hangar that we're dealing with here. So there is an airplane in there that has no wings and then has all of the household items that are stored in there. So it's essentially being used as a storage facility. Mr. Anderson is also a long-term tenant. He used to have a spray business. I think he's been around in various capacities for 30 years or more. However, he no longer flies. He no longer has an airplane that's capable of flying, and this space, in our estimation, is just being used for storage. And so to that end, I'm recommending that we not continue to go month to month with Mr. Anderson and our relationship, and then remarket this property for an aviation-related purpose, or aeronautical purpose, which this is not currently.
Any further questions for our airport director? Thank you, Rick. Further discussion from council? Alderman Patergula.
I guess just a comment. I wanted to praise the airport for doing this kind of audit. And I think this is another example of what the city manager talked about, of us ignoring deferred maintenance. Part of maintenance is making sure that our facilities are being used for the purpose they're supposed to be used. And I think the fact that this has been ignored for years, brings us to this, at least in the previous one, rather painful kind of decision to have to make. So I think this underscores the importance of staying on top of these things, whether it's inspecting, properties we lease out, whether it's inspecting our infrastructure. We have to keep current with this. Otherwise, when it catches up with us, it becomes very unpleasant for everyone.
Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 8.7, no parking along First Street Northeast at Hammond Park. The mid-block crosswalk is part of the 2019 Storm Sewer Rehabilitation Project. Public Works is improving First Street Northeast and 8th Avenue Northeast by rebuilding portions of the roadway, installing the curb, and upgrading the ADA-compliant crosswalks. Engineering, Public Works, and the Park District work together to develop the several alternatives for an appropriate location of an east-west pedestrian crosswalk at First Street Northeast and 8th Avenue Northeast intersection. The alternatives are described in the attached memo to the packet. The recommendation that the council west side of First Street Northeast, south 120 to 180 feet from the west center of the 8th Avenue Northeast, and east side of the First Street Northeast, south 110 feet to 170 feet from the east center of the 8th Avenue Northeast intersection. Recommendation from staff is to pass an ordinance adding the parking restrictions to those locations.
Move approval.
Motion to approve by Alderman Olson. Do I have a second? Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Alderman Padragula. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, can I just ask a technical question in terms of the the amendment, I believe I just heard you say you cited there were some alternatives presented, and I'm trying to find those in my packet. Am I wrong in what I heard?
I think for that, I would look to Lance Meyer, our chief engineer here.
Thank you,
for the
sir.
evening, perhaps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to take a look at some of the proposed options that we had come up with during the preliminary design of this project. So taking a step back to what this really is, it's a drainage improvement project. And so if anybody's looked out there recently after that recent storm, there's about 5 inches of water sitting in the west curb line along First Street. And really over time that the area of the city has developed around it. It's been urbanized with curb and gutter and paving, but for whatever reason, this side of the street hasn't. And so back in about 2014, the city, in partnership with the Minot Park District, did a rehabilitation project with the park for improvements at Hammond Park. So that's where you see the basketball courts, the parking lots, and then the resurfacing of the tennis courts. Now, fast forward a few years, and we're trying to correct the drainage issues that have been plaguing that area for, probably for the better part of 80 years. With that project, we're going to install curb and gutter and some inlets to pick up that water. And then, in addition, anytime we do a major rehab project like this, we have to make ADA-compliant pedestrian ramps. So I think us all standing and sitting here can agree that folks who are able are going to cross the street wherever they can. However, folks that are disabled in a wheelchair or need assistance walking, our job is to find them the fastest way from point A to point B. And if you look on the exhibit that's in front of you, the Park District has their 2 ADA compliance spots right next to the basketball courts, and then you'll see the striped areas in their parking lot. That's the area where you're not supposed to park so you can get wheelchairs in and out. This actually lines up perfectly with the ADA compliant sidewalk and pedestrian ramps that we're planning on putting in at mid-block. We looked at 3 options on this. The first being, and the mouse seems to have disappeared, so we'll have to just go through this together, but at the very top of the screen, option number 3, that's the option that has the green lines that go north and then back south. We can't put the ADA crosswalks there because there's a catch basin there that's grade limited, so the landing would go right in the middle or near the crosswalk. So we can't move it just because of the grade, so that option was eliminated. If we look at option 2, that's the blue outline right on the south side of the intersection. That's traditionally where we'd like to put ADA compliant sidewalks, is right at the intersections. But we have some issues with this one as well. The intersection does have a slight skew to it. Well, it doesn't seem like much when you start offsetting these crosswalks farther back and you get them away from the intersection. There does seems to be site obstructions that can come up. Drivers aren't quite expecting that, those crosswalks to be farther back. And then in addition here, we have a lot of private infrastructure from the utility companies that would be center punched with this. There's a major node that SRT has. This line is supposed to feed the base, is what I was told. So trying to move that infrastructure not only would be costly, but time consuming. And wherever possible, we try to share the right of way and move some of these things around to accommodate parties. So we'd have to shift the crosswalk even farther back. And while this option may be feasible, when you start looking at the view obstructions that we have and some of the safety impacts, that's what led us to take a look at a mid-block crosswalk. In this instance, because the Park District had already installed the ADA compliant crosswalk coming out of the handicap spots, we were able to line up the mid-block crosswalk to be able to service both the tennis courts and the basketball courts and provide a safe crossing for folks that have disabilities. Where the parking restriction comes in, it's just like 3rd Street downtown where we have the flashing beacon. We have view obstructions there if cars park too close to the sidewalk. So the goal is to try to get those cars to park farther back so that if someone does come to the edge of the sidewalk, if you're driving down the roadway, you can see that person, then yield to them before they would cross. So a little bit different situation than 3rd Street, but the principles are exactly the same. When Public Works was working on this, they did have a conversation, it was about 8 months ago, so everyone had to jog their memories on exactly what we talked about. And at the last meeting, we knew we had a reason why we moved it mid-block, but we couldn't exactly remember why. Well, going back and looking, this is why. We had all these obstructions in the way that we had to work around. Public Works has been working with the Park District on not only where to put the ADA crosswalk, but they have some improvements they want to do in their north parking lot that'll tie into this. So there's lots of cross-communication here on trying to make this thing work. We've talked to Director Merritt and his staff, and he's fine with the location. And so that's why we're recommending option number 1, which was our original design to install this mid-block crosswalk. If you have any questions, Mayor or Council will be happy to try to answer those.
Questions for engineer? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lance, great explanation. It's the stuff that we need to do a better job at. I think it brings me to my question. Do we ever send letters out to the neighborhood saying, this is something proposed? Do we ever conduct like a little listening session of what's happening on projects such as this?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Straight, not specifically on this one, but in areas where we have restricted parking, such as in neighborhoods, we have sent out letters. A few years ago, near the soccer complex on 21st Avenue, we did do some parking restrictions there to help with site obstructions and some other things, and we did notify residents that this item will be up for discussion at the committee meeting. So in opportunities like that, we do invite the public. We had some questions and concerns a few years ago at Longfellow Elementary. Same thing, we invited the neighborhood to a meeting there to talk through that. In this case, with a Park District owning both sides of the roadway, the conversation was really with them to see if they were going to be okay with the concept. And their response was, well, it's your guys' right away, you know what you're doing, do your best. So,
thanks, Lance.
Further questions for Mr. Meyer? Any questions? Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
Moving on to discussion, Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. I appreciate the explanation, Lance. I'm just, Mr. Hackett, can we bring that slide back up? I just want to share a story, if he's back there. Pause. So I brought this up, and I'm grateful that it went back to staff for one more review. As I contemplated this project last week or last meeting, I spent a lot of time down there. I have four nephews who play tennis, and I'm regularly hanging out in this particular part of town. When Derek gets this slide back up, I just want to point out the fact that I want us to be conscious of how people use this type of infrastructure, as well as the ADA requirements and all the other issues that come into play. As I sat in the little next to the basketball court in the little picnic shelter, I observed what were probably a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old girl come off the north edge of the tennis courts and cross almost exactly where probably the 29 is on this screen. And in that exact location, there is a significant, on the east side, there is a significant bush or brush. And they had to peek out onto the street, a 6-year-old girl and a 4-year-old girl, or approximately those ages, and essentially step out to be able to gain the perspective that allowed them to cross safely. And I bring it up, A, because we can put up all the no parking signs in the world, but if we don't address those types of obstructions in that area, we may actually be making this more risky, because if drivers assume that pedestrians are going to be in a crosswalk, but their natural patterns, which flow them off the north side of the tennis courts, push them towards crossing in that particular location, I just always wonder what grounds we're making towards safety. Ultimately, I'm going to support this. I appreciate the extra look. This is a lot of conversation for a fairly simple crosswalk, but I want to be conscious of these things in the future. And I want our values when evaluating these projects to start with people first and the way we behave in these environments as opposed to ADA standards.
Mr. Meyer, follow?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, I'd be happy to talk with Director Merritt's staff and the city forester to see what options we may have to clear up the brush.
That would be great.
Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I too am going to support this tonight. I really appreciate Lance's description. I just want to point you to the 32 on the north side of the screen. Across the street there to the north, you have Wayne Whitty's property. To the east, you have Vivian Zimmerman's property. I've met with Ms. Zimmerman's family as a senior resident of our community who has a real hard time getting out of her driveway during tennis matches, tennis tournaments, buses park across the street. I appreciate our traffic engineer meeting with me and saying, Shannon, I'll take a look at it, I'll go out. This is just the receptive nature that we want to see in staff, and I appreciate staff taking the time, and thanks, man. I'm not trying to needle, but Lance, your description of all of the issues, thanks. It solves the issue.
Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padrigula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 8.8. This is the City Hall retaining wall alternative selection. We do have a grouted rock retaining wall system currently in place to retain the soil from the City Hall complex. The system was constructed in 1954, making the existing slope system 65 years old. Over the years, repairs have been made to the wall to keep it in serviceable condition. However, the walls have outlived their useful lives and are in need of replacement. There's a number of recommendations on the screen, and Mr. Meyer here is here again with a presentation on the City Hall wall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. What I'd like to do now is introduce Ms. Casey McNames, a structural engineer with KLJ. She's our project manager on the consulting team. And she's going to walk you through our preliminary engineering for this and what some of the recommended options are. After Casey's done with her presentation, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you all may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Alderman. Thank you, Lance, for giving me the opportunity today to speak in front of you. Casey McNames with KLJ. Here really to walk you through the progress that we've made since beginning the project in April of this year. So we'll walk throughout the presentation, background, what are existing conditions, what kind of system needs do we see, what alternatives did we look at, the process we went through with the aesthetics committee in evaluating those options, and then the decisions that we're looking for today from the council. So there's not a lot that's known about the existing slopes on the site. There's no plans, there's no specifications, all of the stuff we've been talking about, that doesn't exist. So when we look at this system, that's a little bit concerning that we don't know a lot about what there is there today. What we do know is that these slopes are about 65 years old. We did some initial evaluation of the system back in 2015, 2016, which included some soil investigations. And we also understand what happened in 2015 with the same exact system on the Hillcrest Drive. So really looking at all those things and formulating options to move forward. Probably the most concerning thing that we should see, and I hope if you take nothing else away from the presentation today, these pictures alarm you. The picture on the left is directly adjacent to the failure that occurred in 2015 with the Hillcrest Drive. You can see in the upper right-hand corner of the left-hand picture where that failure actually is. And you can see that condition of that slope at the time of failure. When you look at the picture on the right of City Hall that was just taken in April, it's drastically worse than what we saw in 2015 in Hillcrest. So once again, if you take nothing else away from my presentation today, I hope that sticks in your mind, the severity of the situation we're talking about. So from an engineering standpoint, what does this mean? What are we concerned with? First off, these types of grouted rock slope systems really only have a longevity of about 5 to 10 years. After that, as we see already, there's a significant amount of maintenance that occur with it. And this has reached the end of its useful life. From the engineering mechanics, we don't have any drainage behind that grouted rock slope, which is causing pressure on that wall. It's
also, as the water moves down, it's causing the material behind it to erode. There's a loss of the grout between the rocks, or the bond between the rocks and the grout. And that's what you see on the right-hand side here. You see that there's a void where those rocks have actually fallen away, and you can see that there should be material directly underneath that, and there's not. There's actually debris. So what are we looking at here? As this continues to deteriorate, which we've seen firsthand over the last 3 or 4 years, the factor of safety continues to lessen. As that factor of safety lessens, we end up with what we see at the Hillcrest project, or the Hillcrest site, with a significant failure. And we were just talking about people. You know, we need to protect our people. Well, think about how many people utilize this facility, they utilize the auditorium facility. If we have a significant failure, that's a big deal. So we want to make sure we're proactive and get on top of this. So looking at the system needs, we really want longevity, we want safety, and we want functionality. So putting all those things together, we found these 6 options, or these 6 items that really helped us vet the process moving forward. We wanted to minimize the site impacts during construction, after construction, maximize the space on the site, make sure there was something that, you know, was presentable when it was done. It fit into the site. We wanted to maintain that useful life, make sure we've got longevity here, safety. When that comes to, you know, vehicles, pedestrians, and whatnot, we want to make sure we have a safe site, and, you know, most importantly, we have to be conscious of that cost. So as we evaluated alternates, we did take a look at 2 different slope options. One would be essentially to replace in kind what we have today. As I mentioned earlier, that longevity is only about 5 to 10 years. We're going to have to continue to put maintenance costs into this, which you've seen firsthand escalate as the age of the structure increases. So overall, the total investment on something like that would be significantly more than what we would see at a retaining wall. We're anticipating about a 30-year payback on a retaining wall versus what we're seeing with a grouted rock slope. If we did a grass slope, the biggest issue there is we would have to lessen the slope of that existing slope. And so what you see with the solid red line on the left-hand side, that's the toe of the existing slope today. If we take that back to a 4-to-1 slope so that it's actually maintainable. You can see it impacts 3rd Avenue. It's going to impact your park district. It's going to impact transit. It's going to impact the use of municipal court. That's going to have to be relocated. You're going to lose seating in the auditorium, and you're going to lose that overall drive lane, the fire lanes and whatnot. So it's a pretty significant impact, and for those reasons, we didn't move that option further. So when we actually looked at the retaining wall options, we took a look at the 2016 study, and we moved the 3 most viable options forward, and that included a large block gravity system, a mechanically stabilized earth system, and a soldier pile wall, as well as looking at various facing options. We're not going to talk a lot about that large block retaining wall today, just because that is the most viable, most economical solution for the wall that's directly south of City Hall. It's a short little wall that we call Wall 1. That's included in all of our cost estimates that we prepared. But we are going to focus more on Wall 2, which is the serpentine wall that separates City Hall from the auditorium. And those 2 systems that really are the most viable are the MSE wall and the soldier pile walls. So when we look at that in plan, how does that lay out? You'll see that they're drastically 2 different alignments, and there's allows for 2 different functions essentially when we're done. With the MSE wall, what we have is we have to move the alignment of the existing wall or existing slopes, which are essentially, I guess I don't know, is this gonna, nope. Okay. So bear with me, but on the south side, we're actually moving the wall north to accommodate construction activities. We don't want to impact 3rd Avenue. When you look at the wall in between where City Hall and the auditorium are, we're actually shifting that over to the west just a little bit to allow for those construction activities, because there's a significant amount of excavation that has to occur on the backside of that. So that's really to protect that existing infrastructure. When you look at the right-hand side, what you're seeing is the extensive construction that would be impacted while we're constructing the wall. So there's a significant impact to parking and overall drive lanes on the City Hall site, and up on top where the auditorium is, we're actually essentially shutting down traffic from being able to move from north to south on the site, and most likely stopping operations at municipal court. So we'd have to find an alternate route to be able to get people in there. So just really quickly, so you understand what I'm talking about, MSE wall, essentially, like I say, we have to excavate a bunch behind the wall so we can put the actual reinforcing that holds that wall system in place. So that's what you're seeing on the screen here, and those are just some images of some constructed systems. So when we look at soldier pile wall, this actually keeps the alignment at the top of the slope where it is today, and it removes all of the material on the front side of that slope. And you can see on the right-hand side, the construction limits are significantly less with the soldier pile system than they are with the MSE system. So most of the activity is going to occur today where we already have dirt. So there's not going to be as significant of an impact during construction. And once again, this is what we used on the Hillcrest wall when it did fail and we repaired it. So that's just an image of Hillcrest on the right. And once again, all of the activity is going to happen in front of the wall, not behind it. So when we started the work, we assembled an aesthetics committee, which included the mayor, various members within the departments here, the Parks District, myself, and then 2 of our landscape architects. We went through and vetted this process. And one of the first objectives that we had during our kickoff meeting was really to establish the committee objectives and make sure those aligned with the system needs. And then we also brought to the table 9 various options for facing. The committee was able to narrow it down to just 3 after that initial meeting, which allowed us to further vet those 3 options as we moved into meeting 2 and 3. So quickly, I'll walk through these. You have these in your packet. The first finish that we looked at was essentially a segmented block wall system. This is the most cost-effective solution there is, and it actually is used with an MSE type system. So the alignment we saw with the extensive construction extents would essentially be what we're looking at here. We also looked at maybe more of a aesthetically pleasing and kind of a repetitive pattern that really allowed for easy replication during construction. This would be utilized for either soldier pile wall, and we would construct it with either precast concrete or cast in place concrete. And the cost associated with this would be 1 to 3% higher than what the MSE wall was. And for the final finish, the committee actually challenged us to really match what we have here at the City Hall building. And so we took different elements that are on the City Hall building and built those into the wall. So that's what you're seeing. The cost here, because it is a little more intricate, is 5 to 8% higher than what the MSE large block is. Keeping costs in mind, we wanted to develop a system that was a hybrid of the options because MSE has its limitations and it has its sweet spot, same with the soldier pile system. So we looked at the potential to use an MSE wall along 2nd Avenue while using a soldier pile wall the rest of the duration. And when we did that, this is the combination of that. So what you see with the block on the left is along 2nd, and the block pattern or the more decorative City Hall pattern that would continue around between City Hall and the auditorium. And the cost savings here is about $140,000. So we had to prepare a method or a chart that allowed the committee to be able to fully vet what these mean to them. It wasn't just about cost. Again, there were a lot of other factors weighing into that. You'll see that we had about 13 options in total. We narrowed that down to 7 viable options, which were based on the total project cost, the estimated truck traffic. As you can see, there's a significant difference in the amount of trucks that would be used for construction during the project. And 4,000 versus 500 is a significant impact, which also has impact on the your surrounding roads. And then look at how do we maximize the use of the site, which kind of equated to parking stalls, and then what's the duration? Is one method shorter than the other? So that's what you see here. And the committee, after reviewing all of the information presented, really felt like a soldier pile wall option was the best way to go, and they felt like the wall finish 3 fit the site the best. So for the reasons of less impacts to the site, less truck traffic, more flexibility with the use of the site, it really was the preferred option that the aesthetics committee selected to move forward with. And this is what that preferred option would look like once constructed. You can see we've got a guardrail at the top. We've got nice accessible stairs where you don't have to worry about widowmakers, is what we call the ones outside today, so they would be safe for pedestrians to use. So with that, the decisions needed today, or we're looking for, is just to move forward with the recommendations that were made by the Aesthetics Committee. And with that, I guess I would thank you for your time and open it up to questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I also do want to mention, sitting on part of that committee, was the guardrails themselves were talked about, not only the necessity because of the height, but because of what the police station ran into a number of years ago with a vehicle that was set on fire and driven over the edge, so that the guardrail would be there not only for aesthetics, but for protection.
Mm-hmm.
So any questions for our presenter?
Yeah.
Alderman Wolski.
I'm sorry, Miss, can you share your name one more time?
Casey McNames.
Casey. Miss McNames, tell me a little bit about the assumptions that go into the 4-to-1 slope that are required for vegetated slopes.
So that's really just based on the fact that you need to be able to maintain them, and anything greater than a 4-to-1 is quite dangerous to try to maintain.
So is the assumption that we have to put power mowers on a slope? Is that
You could potentially look at, a turf as well, but if you look at the overall impacts to the site, you're talking millions of dollars to fix the auditorium when that slope is put in.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Alderman Patrugula.
A comment and a question. First of all, I wanted to compliment you on your presentation. It's very nice to have a structural engineer and expert in these instructors present, and your presentation was remarkably free of jargon and easy to understand. Comment number two, or question number two, is I'm not sure I understand what option 4B/5B, or excuse me, 5B/4B differs, how that differs from 5A/4A.
Sure, and I apologize. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, our Alderman Patrugula. The difference between those options really are, so 5A utilizes soldier pile with cast-in-place concrete facing. Option 4A includes soldier pile with precast concrete facing. And then when you look at the B options, that leaves that hybrid option with the block, the MSE block wall along 2nd Avenue.
So do you have an illustration of 5A/4A?
Yep. So this would be 5B and 4B right here. And essentially this would be this option here, full soldier pile along the length would be 5A and 4A. So really the only difference is the physical, what we use for that concrete. We either ship it on site and we install it, or we cast it on site. That's really the only difference, but there is a cost difference there, and that's one thing we brought forward to the Aesthetics Committee, was the ability to be able to price or bid those systems together so that we get the most cost-effective option. Those two systems are competing daily, and so to create more competitive bid environment is pretty significant, especially with the costs that we're looking at.
But they would still look like this picture?
Correct.
Thank you.
Further questions for McNames? Alderman Olson.
Ready to accept a motion?
Any further questions? Alderman Pittner.
I would have a question for Lance, if possible. Lance, just when looking at the capital improvement plan, the total project cost for this in the CIP is quite different than what we're seeing in front of us. Any insight into that, why that is?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, when we were looking at this project cost several years ago and trying to put this together, we were probably picking an option that was on the lower end of what's being presented today. In addition, those costs were a few years ago. And then also, I think there's a bit of wishful thinking on city staff's part that we could get a project delivered for that cheap. However, no matter which option we select here.
Between the prayer or the hope and this dollar-wise?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Patrugula, the prayer was 2.8 million, and we're probably looking at about 4.7.
Thank you.
Further questions? If not, Alderman Olson?
I would move staff approval and the Aesthetics Committee recommendations.
We have a motion by Alderman Olson for the staff recommendation and then the Aesthetic Committee recommendation as well, which is option 2 on number 2. And then I would assume number 3 as well, to negotiate the scope and fee and engineering recommendation. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion. Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for our city manager, and I'm going to, first, Tom, I'm going to touch on my, I thank you for all your hard work in helping us earn the Hub City funding money, but I would like to hear we've heard from you recently regarding deferred maintenance and things that are long overdue. I don't refute that or disagree with you. I recognize the challenges that are before us, but I'm increasingly having a hard time seeing if we have a plan for Hub City funding or if we're just kind of throwing it at the most pressing needs. And if you could kind of talk us through a little bit of getting to this point in terms of the funding sources for it, because that's ultimately what I'm having a hard time with.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Alderman Straight, I think that's a very good question or series of questions. First, the Hub City funding has been used for various infrastructure projects around the city as one-time expenditures for whatever the project was that we had that most likely, in most cases, fit the infrastructure requirements associated with oil and gas impacts in our region. We have used that funding for other projects that may not have as clear a nexus, but we do identify, based upon what projects we have in the CIP, where the appropriate funding sources are coming from or should be coming from. You might recall that our CIP was essentially polished and delivered to you earlier this year prior to our knowing what the Hub City funding formula would look like, and so it will be revised later this year in its next iteration to include those specific infrastructure projects which would, we believe, be eligible for the Hub City funding. So that's all going to be worked on later this fall, so we'll have a little bit more description about that for you. As it relates to this particular project, the way we intend to close the gap is in two adjustments to the budget, and you'll see that in the budget that's been presented to you, or I'll present here just in a few minutes. First of all, I'll remind you that when the City Council decided to merge with, or essentially transition the Auditorium and Recreation departments to the Parks District, and there was some additional monies that the city had in reserves that it was entitled to and kept. It was about $900,000. And so we're intending to use that $900,000 toward the auditorium protection, if you will, because that's essentially what the money was raised for, not necessarily this particular project, but for the auditorium. So this does protect the integrity of the auditorium, and we feel strongly that that can be used for that. So that closes the gap by $900,000. And then what we've done is, instead of utilizing and setting aside $7.5 million for the new City Hall project, we reduced that by $1 million and took the $1 million from that and put it towards this particular project to try to close the gap. So those are the two ways that we're closing the gap. It gets us pretty close. And then we anticipate that we'll have a little bit more, as we mentioned in past conversations. Since we're collecting Hub City funding earlier than it was budgeted, we should have a little bit of, maybe $500,000 to $800,000 of additional dollars for this particular year that wasn't budgeted because the funding formula went into place with the state's budget in July, essentially. So we're pretty confident that we can make up the cost differential through those three mechanisms.
Thank you, sir.
Further discussion. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. A comment to Mr. Berry here, and I think staff in general. This project has gone from an estimated $2.8 million to now roughly estimated $4.7 million. I appreciate the opportunity, the fact that we have to potentially make a decision on the aesthetics here, but when a project goes that significantly over its estimate at this particular stage, and we haven't even turned a wheel or dug in, I think it's appropriate, given the amounts that these come back for, a secondary approval related to the financials. Nobody will be surprised I was not a supporter of this project. I believe there are alternatives that have yet to be explored. We are taking this on in terms of a risk mitigation project, but there is no scenario under which we move forward, whether with the safest, sturdiest wall, or no action, or pulling the back to the grass slope. There is no option that eliminates risk for us in this situation. That scenario doesn't exist. To be very frank, I think we are entering into a project here that is a parking garage proportion. And I would very much like to see us slow this down, direct our consultant to go back and check all the boxes again on all of the alternatives. Two that I've done some just very preliminary research on are steel reinforced steel slopes, steel reinforced steep slopes. I've got another product here which is known as, well, which one did I pull up? High-density polyethylene. These are dimensional cells that they can be used for soil stabilization on steep embankments. I think we need to challenge the assumption that a 4-to-1 slope is required. I think if we were to plant native species or decorative grasses, native grasses, we could put a wall slope in place that would be minimal to zero maintenance and not need the dramatic 4-to-1 slope that is represented in the drawings that we've looked at tonight. I'm not supportive of moving this project forward. If ultimately it fails for some reason, I'd be happy to help contemplate an or a secondary motion.
Alderman Walski, I anticipated that you may not be in favor of this, but going through this process, I'm going to go with the structural engineers. And looking at the costs, this is what happens when projects get delayed this long. We've talked about, I remember talking about this when I wasn't on council, or hearing about it rather, when it wasn't on council. Absolutely, the price is a lot more than any of us would like, but this is not only I think one of the safest options. It's not the safest because we're trying to do this on a budget, but it's, I think, the best that we can do in terms of mitigating that risk and looking at the options that are laid before us with the professionals that we're here to rely on. Alderman Patagula.
I appreciate your comments, having been on that committee, Mr. Mayor, and I just wanted a very, very quick response from the structural engineer who happens to be here still to the alternatives that Alderman Walski raised. I'm not sure, given the safety issues, that I want to hold off on this much longer, but I think he raises some significant questions about alternatives, and I think if the expert is here, we might as well hear it from her mouth at this point, at least a preliminary assessment of alternatives.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Alderman Patagula. So as far as the systems that Alderman Wolski mentioned, the big thing that we have to keep in mind, and we did talk about throughout the preliminary engineering phase, and you're only seeing a snippet of it, and I apologize that we couldn't bring you through that whole process, but we really wanted to focus on, we've been focusing on a lot of local discussions tonight, finding local resources. Well, we looked at systems that were maybe more economical, but the problem is we don't have local resources to be able to build them. So one of the systems that you mentioned, that steel sheet wall, we don't have local contractors that can do that. So the costs are going to go up because we're going to have to bring in outside experts. In addition, if I understand what you're talking about with the polymer or basically the foam blocks, that's really just to lighten the fill. It's not used to actually physically retain soil. It's just to help lighten the load of the soil itself, to help it from wanting to collapse. So that really doesn't help us a ton with the issue that we have.
Thank you.
Further discussion, Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. This is what we signed up for. This is balancing a budget public safety, deferred maintenance. This isn't an easy one. I don't like seeing these numbers come in to where they are, but that's a reality that we live in too, that when you push those projects down the road further and further and further, this is what we get stuck with, a nice hefty bill, because we have to not only modernize what we have deferred, but then go back and fix the unforeseens and all of the above. So this is tough. I too, for the sake of public safety and seeing this number creep even higher, lean towards supporting this project moving forward. But I just want this to be an example of a lot of the things in this kind of rehashing with this item, the capital improvement project. I'd hate to see some of these other items come forth and us be kind of caught off guard with another hefty price tag. So again, it's not an easy one to pull the trigger on, but I think it's for the sake of safety and deferred maintenance, we have to make the tough decisions.
Any further discussion? The motion before us is the option 3, and number 2 is also number 2, option 5A and 4A, as well as the recommendation for the authorization for the city engineer to negotiate a scope and fee. Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
No.
Wolski?
No.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion approved. That takes us to number 9, personal appearances. This is an opportunity for individuals to come up and speak on items that are not on our agenda. So I would suggest, as some folks have been waiting to come on up, if you would, your name and affiliation, if that's who you're representing.
Well, we would first like to thank you guys for your time. To introduce myself, I am Sarah Bachmeyer. I'm the Vice Chair of the Minot Area Recovery Community Organization. To give a brief overview of the last few months, first and foremost, our board has met almost every other week, fairly consistently, other than some scheduling difficulties. We've taken this time to really learn about our fellow board members and our purpose and our plan moving forward. The board has been in communication with Bush Foundation from the beginning, and our steady pace has been met with encouragement and support, along with consistent guidance. While we wait for our nonprofit status to be approved, we're in the process of planning a few community events, some coming up recently. We as a board are very eager to keep moving forward with our progress, and a key component to that has been finding our executive director. I'm pleased to publicly announce that the board has hired Andrew Schultz to fill that position. Oh. Did you say anything?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman, I know a lot of people here. I know almost all of you. The ones that I don't know, I'm looking forward to getting to know you. This organization is one of the few of its kind in the country, and it's the first in North Dakota. We are an organization out to get things done. Our mandate is 100 miles in every direction to coordinate existing recovery resources and to actually do our own objective empirical studies to find out where the holes are and then help people develop new entities to fix those holes. So we are a group out to get things done. These board members, and myself included, there's not a person here, and I'm willing to bet that none of you or any people in the audience or anybody watching at home, no one who hasn't been affected in some way by either methamphetamine or heroin or opioids, anything going on with our drug epidemic right now. So this is a community effort. When we were thinking of what to call ourselves, we wanted to make sure the community was in the name of our group for just that reason. So we do have some events coming up. We are waiting on our nonprofit status to clear, through the Secretary of State. We'll be hopefully taking care of that shortly. But we do have our first event lined up. It is going to be a luncheon on September 6th. At 11 o'clock for local industry professionals. one of the things that we want to do right off the bat is find out where we stand and what we need to do from here. So it is vital to have that kind of conversation right off the bat. After that, we're looking at public awareness events and getting into the end of this year and early next year, maybe a trunk or treat, something this fall, and planning different kinds of community events like golf scrambles. And there have been some discussions about, because we are such a new organization, this is such a new concept, using our visibility to attract some higher profile speakers. We have floated some names of celebrities who we may approach who have acknowledged that they're in recovery, and see if we can bring them here to do some guest speaking. So we are ready to hit the ground running, and we're all here to get to work. So if we have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
First and foremost, congratulations. I would only extend my own self-invitation to your next board meeting to sit down and get a purview of everything that's been going on. And I know I've tried to contact Mr. Burlingame recently. Unfortunately, he's off on vacation, I think. Not to say his unfortunate,
The rest
but ours.
of the board is here. We all came and sat.
Watching, actually.
Yeah, he's watching. Hi, Scott.
So at the next, I would appreciate an invitation to come in and do a little follow-up since the last, I think, discussion we had in this council chambers with the Mayor's Committee on Addiction. So,
That's right. That's right.
any questions from the council? If not, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for waiting out, and good luck, and we'll be chatting soon.
Excellent. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Personal appearances continues. Good evening. If you would, your name for the record, please.
Good evening, Mayor Sitma and members of the council. My name is Jessica Ackerman, and I live at 1112 Sunrise Court in Minot. I would like to deliver the full dialogue of what I had planned for tonight, although I'm sensitive to the length of time that you've been sitting here. So I would respectfully request that I can give this as it was presented to you as council members this afternoon via email, but so that also the members of the community can hear this as well. Is that acceptable?
How long are we looking, Ms. Ackerman?
How fast can I talk is the question?
Can we fit it in 5 to 6 minutes and then get into Q&A?
I can abbreviate it to 5 to 6, but I'm afraid it's going to lose a bit of its impact for the community if I do that.
As good as we can.
Okay. So for full public disclosure, and as many are aware, I'm very active in our community and serve on the Visit Minot Board, the North Coast Fest Board, and also the Minot Area Community Foundation Board. My husband and business partner, Ryan, is here as well, and he serves on the boards for the Minot Area Development Corporation as well as the Downtown Association. He started Ackerman Estvold in late 2003 with 3 other partners and is currently the CEO of that organization. In his role there, he is under contract to serve as the administrator for the Souris River Joint Board. Together, we are members of multiple redevelopment groups in the community. Stake in Minot, which redeveloped the previously vacant Choice Hotels call center into 21,000 square feet of professional office space. Beaver Ridge, which redeveloped the former AJ Automotive site along North Broadway into a mixed-use property across from Minot State University. And also, most recently, Axel Group, which is in the process of redeveloping several buildings in downtown Minot. We offer this litany for transparency and also to make ourselves available for questions from this council. It's unfortunate that a few members of our community have decided to leverage personal attacks on us. As elected officials, you're subjected to the same type of treatment on social media, and I guess it's the price that we have to pay for admission to get into the public arena. And if that's the case, then so be it. We're here to talk openly and honestly about the downtown gathering place. Our opinion is that the property owners have been very patient with how this process has unfolded. This evening, we're joined by Keith and Jackie Blums, and Mitch Evenson, the trustee for the Elda Evenson Trust, had to leave early, and then as a last minute piece, Dick Olson of RMM Properties was unable to join us. With the exception of the owner of the land occupied by the billboard on the north side of First Avenue and Canadian Pacific Railroad, we are the private property owners of what the city has referred to as Site 2 for the downtown gathering place. The system that the community has been using to implement this project isn't working very well. Efforts to collaborate have been resisted. The city has been unable to engage in a meaningful public conversation about how the space will look and function. The city gives updates from the council podium on the status of the negotiations, which tell a one-sided accounting of the process and shine the property owners in a negative light. And these are the property owners that the city is trying to negotiate with. The system is flawed, and we seem to allow that to perpetuate for the fear that we're somehow going to be chastised by or punished by HUD. We aren't here to tell you that HUD doesn't have rules that need to be followed, and we aren't here to throw darts at city officials either. We're here simply to offer a different perspective that has been lacking in the public conversation up to this point. We have some questions and comments about this project. A vast majority of the information that we'll share with you this evening and that we shared with you via email has been shared with the city previously, so I apologize if this is repetitive, but it's something that we feel prudent to bring our concerns to light, and because these have implications on the long-term success of this project and of downtown, of which we are all very active supporters. We want to see this project become a reality for the city of Minot, but the last thing that we want to be involved in is a project that seems to be set up for failure from the get-go. We believe the city officials are of the same mindset. So if I may please indulge you in the information that I sent earlier today so that the public who tunes in via YouTube and social media has a chance to hear this as well, I would appreciate that. The first thing that we'd like to address is the project budget and the associated area requirements. The definition of required area has been unclear from our perspective. The Phase 2 NDRC application stated that the site would be 2 acres, and that became the basis for the grant agreement. However, the Phase 2 application also listed the cost of the project to be $10.795 million, with $2 million of that total being provided through a local leverage. When the grant was awarded, the total of $6 million was to be provided by HUD, and no communication has occurred to our knowledge with regard to any local funding, leading the public to believe that this is going to be a $6 million project all in. If you consider a couple of the other gathering place projects that have been referred to as comparable by the city, it helps to illustrate the challenge that we have in this category. The gathering place in Rapid City is illustrated on the City of Minot CDBG page as an example of our proposed gathering place. This project opened in 2011, consisted of 1 acre, and cost approximately $6.5 million to build. To rephrase this, Rapid City paid $6.5 million for a 1 acre gathering place nearly 10 years ago. A project of similar fixtures and finishes, scaled up to 2 acres and adjusted for inflation, is going to be well above the $6 million budget identified by the City of Minot. A recent presentation was also given to the Downtown Association that referenced a gathering place in Caldwell, Idaho. From what we understand on that project, it opened in 2018, consisted of 1.3 acres, and cost approximately $7.3 million to build. Both of these projects are fantastic examples, and we think that the community is pretty excited to see something like this in our downtown. So the questions that we're asking about budget and area requirements are, 1, has the City of Minot evaluated whether or not the $6 million will be adequate to construct a 2 acre gathering place that meets the original intent listed in the NDRC application, keeping in mind that the city estimated the cost of this project to be closer to $11 million 4 years ago? And 2, has the City of Minot requested that HUD clarify the area requirements based on the fact that the budget of $6 million is less than 60% of what was contemplated originally? Proportionately, the $6 million of gathering place with fixtures and finishes like we've discussed from the original application would consist of roughly 1.11 acres. If the proportion of the HUD dollars, the $6 million dollars awarded to the HUD dollars requested at $8.795 million, removing that $2 million local leverage, were used as the basis, the required size would be roughly 1.36 acres. The next thing that we'd like to address is related to the operation and revenues associated with the space. The downtown gathering place has been presented to the community as an asset that will be tax neutral. Our opinion is that it should be better than that. In other communities, a downtown gathering place is used as a venue to generate revenue from community events that help to perpetuate the operations and maintenance of the facility, as well as to provide enhanced services in the neighborhoods surrounding the space. In Rapid City, for example, the same crew that maintains, organizes, and runs events in the gathering place also plants the flowers, cleans the building facades, and performs beautification effort in the greater downtown area. They do this by the generation of revenue from the rental of the space to private parties, charging for services, and charging for certain events. We think that the City of Minot should request clarification from HUD regarding the requirement that the space remain open to the public 24/7, 365, and that charging admission fees for planned events or rental of the space to third parties would not be acceptable. We also have concerns with the city's description of the proposed project, which is basically to acquire and demolish all of the buildings within the Gathering Place footprint and construct a park. We respectfully request that you don't do this. The buildings are the character and the history of downtown that make it unique. The Downtown Gathering Place is an opportunity to meld the character and history of downtown with a project that will accomplish the objectives that the community outlined back in 2015. If we want to be a successful and active community resource throughout the year, complementary indoor space, whether inside the footprint of the project or immediately adjacent to it, is necessary. We would also like to offer some perspective on the acquisitions process to describe why this has been challenging for the property owners. In letters from January 2018, property owners were notified of the city's intentions to make offers and indicated that the, quote, initial offer will be made for not less than the appraised value, end quote. This would seem to imply that the offers would be based on an appraisal and that the appraised value was to serve as a floor. Property owners were surprised then to get an offer from the city that didn't have an appraisal used as the basis. To compound the frustration, the City of Minot sent original offer letters of February of this year, and in March of this year, some of the property owners received a second letter from the City of Minot indicating that the properties were going to be tax assessed at values approximately 25% higher than that February offer. We realize that the negotiations are being driven by the resilience program on one hand, and the assessor's office is responsible for sending notices regarding significant valuation increases on the other hand. So while these are two separate city departments, it is still the city. So the timing of the letters from and the tax assessor letters was unfortunate and fueled the frustration of the property owners. The issue of special assessments has been another aspect that has caused frustration among the property owners. As you may recall, the city finalized special assessments for the downtown storm sewer and lighting infrastructure project last fall. Initial letters from the city didn't include any mention of these special assessments, so the property owners reached out for clarification. We were then surprised to learn that the city's position would be that all current owners would be responsible for paying the balances of all outstanding special assessments for the properties. Through significant back and forth dialogue, the city's position became more amenable, whereby the special assessments would be prorated to the date of closing. Had this not been brought up by the property owners could have arrived at closing only then to realize that the purchase price would be significantly reduced at the closing table through the deduction of these outstanding special assessments, which in some cases were rather significant. Another item that's challenging is the issue of timing. The city's position is that earnest money, the down payment to secure a purchase contract, is not something that is reasonable. While we can certainly understand that a voluntary acquisition means that either party can simply say no, the implementation becomes tricky when you're dealing with multiple property owners, and here's why. If the property owners say yes to a voluntary acquisition, we essentially put ourselves in a vulnerable financial position in the event that the project falls through. The city wants the property owners to commit to selling, but the city is not willing to commit to buying. As property owners, we're losing revenues due to the lack of certainty that our tenants have. They think their apartments or their storage lockers or their parking spots are going away, so they need to find spots in other locations. Additionally, the city has taken the position that if improvements are made to the property between now and the time of closing, which could be months from now, the value of those improvements will not be considered by the city. So we sit in stasis while losing revenue and paying interest. The typical solution to mitigating this risk is to establish a payment of earnest money by the buyer. While this is standard real estate practice, we were told this wasn't possible or reasonable. Some have acquiesced in order to keep the idea alive for our community, but we're doing so at our own cost and risk. Additionally, commentary from city officials within the community on the status of negotiations is frustrating to hear because the narrative has been one-sided. Comments have been made publicly that property owners have been asking for much more than what the property is worth, and statements like that place the property owners in a very negative light. However, what the public hasn't heard is that the property owners have paid thousands of dollars to have their own certified appraisals completed, appraisals which were seemingly going to be the responsibility of the city, and that property owners have presented counteroffers to the city based on the values identified in those certified appraisals. So here is the following proposal for the City of Minot and City Council to consider. And this will kind of complement with the Gathering Place footprint document that you received, a graphic that will follow along with what I explain. Number one, move forward with a baseline project that consists of a smaller area, similar to what is shown on the enclosed map, using parcels 1 through 7. This area would total approximately 1.2 acres. Number two, if the baseline project is too small, work to secure parcel 8 from the Canadian Pacific Railroad. If secured, the total area would become approximately 1.6 acres. Evaluate if CP Rail would be amenable to a long-term lease in the event that a sale isn't an option. Number three, if there's a desire to make this project much more of a partnership opportunity, consider vacating First Avenue Southeast between 2nd Street and 3rd Street and performing a land swap with the Minot Public School District that would leave the school with an equivalent area but would also connect the downtown Gathering Place with nearly a 2-acre school green space next door. If parcels 9 and 10 were added to the footprint, the total area, excluding the area owned by the school district, would be approximately 2.1 acres. Number four, if there is a need to include certain buildings in the footprint of a gathering place, consider adding parcels 11 and 12. If not, allow parcel 11 to be developed privately, and consider parcel 12, the Sioux Line Freight House, as a location for a public or private venture that would complement and enhance the gathering place potential, perhaps an entrepreneurial incubator. Parcels 1 through 12 total approximately 2.4 acres. In the scenarios outlined above, the Evenson and Blum's properties are required. Both of these property owners have paid for certified appraisals of their properties and have made counteroffers to the City of Minot using those appraisals as the basis. Additionally, the property owned by RMM Properties is not necessary and could remain. Finally, in the scenarios outlined above, only a part of the property owned by Axel Group is necessary. Axel Group will be willing to entertain a donation of this land to the city if accommodations are made to the remaining adjacent structures to ensure they are structurally sound and meld with the aesthetic of the neighborhood and the gathering place. The potential is illustrated in the other attached materials. We believe our willingness to help the city identify multiple means to salvage this project for our community speaks to our desire to make this work for the City Minot residents, visitors to our community, and our downtown. With regard to the city-imposed deadline for negotiations, counteroffers have been presented by the Evenson and Blum's properties, accompanied by the certified appraisals. Property owners have been told that this is an all-or-nothing arrangement, where if one property owner chooses to not sell, the whole project must move. I think we've illustrated that there are multiple ways this project can come to fruition. We want closure to this, just as quickly as the city does. We hope that hearing directly from the property owners shares a perspective that's been lacking in the council updates and in public conversation about this project. We hope you seriously consider the questions and comments that have been raised regarding the long-term success of this project. We want to see the downtown gathering place become a reality.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. I think foregoing 2.5 more hours of discussion, because I think that that's where we could easily go with this one. And getting the information that is before us, if we had checked our emails, was about 1:30 this afternoon or on our desk this evening. I fully understand that we've set a deadline at the end of August that is quickly approaching. I think the best avenue on this to avoid some of the struggles that and challenges that we've got with HUD, I definitely think that we need to get together, and whether that's myself and an alderman and the collective, which may actually give HUD some heartburn, but to keep it on the side of information rather than negotiation, and then let negotiation go from there. I think if we could do that even this week or possibly early next, to address the questions and fully vet the options. So I understand absolutely that waiting a full 2 weeks for the council to reconvene to get the full questions and answers, and given that amount of time, I think Mr. Zakian has provided some answers already, but I definitely think that we need to get the group together if so willing, and if not, the process is going to continue individually. So we really have two options on in this one, and whether Mr. Zakian really shakes his head at me, but I think it's worth a collective Q&A, but we're going to keep the council out of the decision-making capacity in terms of having a majority within for a special council meeting to meet with them. Mr. Zakian, how much heartburn have I just given you?
Two quick things, and I appreciate what you're saying. I want to make sure we stay in compliance. There's nothing wrong with your suggestion about having a meeting. You cannot discuss negotiations on price or the configuration of the gathering space. The one thing I do want to make as a statement, because we can give HUD heartburn, but we don't want to cross over a line. The only reason that we received this substantial amendment, which is still the only substantial amendment that HUD has granted to an NDR grantee, is because the city has represented to HUD that there are 3 viable sites for the gathering space. And we were able to demonstrate, therefore, that we could use voluntary acquisition. The only purpose of the site vetting process that we went through was to establish an order in the site acquisition process. It was not to say that we were only going to focus on one site. If a site acquisition for one of the 3 sites is either too costly, becomes too complicated, becomes too convoluted, becomes far more than what is contained or represented in the action plan, or if insufficient land based on what we promised in the action plan cannot be acquired, we are obligated to move on to the next site. It would be a serious breach of the contract we have with HUD and what we have promised HUD if we do anything less.
Mr. Zakian, I think then in light of making an appointment for a meeting, I think perhaps if you and I were to have those discussions even later this week, if we can fit that in, or early next, and then we'll provide as much information as we can, set on those parameters, and find out where we collectively stand, and then perhaps next week we will have an agenda item that has gathering space in some form or fashion.
I'm at your disposal. One other thing, very technical, because I don't want anybody to be blindsided, but if you do consider the proposal that was presented here tonight, it will delay the project 18 months, because we will have to go back to ground zero and start all over again under the HUD rules, and we can talk about that when we meet.
Okay. So if we can take a look at calendars.
You tell me and
Okay, all right. With that, personal appearances, Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I guess from my standpoint, I would really like to see that meeting set in stone, shared with council members of when it's going to be as soon as possible. I'm not looking to needle the process, and I understand Mr. Zakian's doing his job, but we have to answer to the citizens of Minot, and the citizens of Minot came before us tonight to present an issue, and I know that I don't want to get in the crosshairs of HUD, but I think we owe it to the citizens, sir, for your involvement and for whoever you choose, sir, to be involved. But I want to see this move forward, and I don't want to see the residents left with an email or a non-personal gathering, because I feel like we owe it to them at this point, sir.
Alderman Padragula.
I would very much agree with Shannon. I think I'm starting to feel like I'm going to be boxed in on something at the end that I'm not going to be able to support anything. And I think given the good faith of the people who came forward this evening, given the controversy that this has generated in the community for a long time, given the incredibly tight constraints we're under with HUD, I really need to have more information. I don't want to negotiate. I don't think that's proper for us as a council to do, but I want the facts, and I want to be able to engage in a discussion, not a formal parliamentary type process as we're stuck with apparently at council. So I'm tempted, actually. I think this should be out in the open. I think we should have an informal discussion. I think we should have enough time to do it and not be constrained by the clock. I'm almost tempted to suggest we have a special council meeting where we can talk about this publicly, we can air it out, and people can have all the facts at the same time. I think this is too important a deal to let kind of slide underneath the radar for people.
Alderman Wolski.
Briefly, I appreciate Alderman Padragula's thoughts. I agree completely. This issue is among the most significant facing this community, and our ability to execute and deliver is going to reflect long into the future and have considerable trust implications. And so I want us to, I would fully support that particular process that Alderman Padragula has outlined.
Further comments?
Mayor Sitma.
Yes, Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just request that if whatever road goes forward, obviously Coldwell, Idaho is cited in this as a recent city that's gone through this process. I would expect Mr. Billingsley to be a part of that conversation.
Once we get to design, absolutely. All right. That takes us to the miscellaneous and discussion items. If we have nothing further, we are heading to our budget. That's me. That's you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We have been hard at work at a lot of things. One of those includes the city's budget for 2020. And so I'm here to present to you the budget. That will be distributed here just momentarily, but also to go over some of the highlights of the budget. So we'll just jump right in here with a couple things. As you know, we've been following the budget schedule that was laid out early in the year, and our budget process starts, way back almost February time or so. I won't go through all the touch points here, but there are a lot of activities that take place over the, past 4 to 5 months, essentially, that have allowed us to move forward the budget and get it to the point in place where it is at this point in time. A couple of things here as it relates to the budget development going forward. We are at the preliminary budget presentation, and what's coming next is on August 19th, the question and answer session, which will be part of the regular city council meeting. We'll start that at 4:15, as I mentioned earlier in the city manager's report, and it again will be in the auditorium room 201. We do have other municipal business that will be addressed that evening as well, because we don't want to put things off, but we will prioritize the agenda to have the Q&A come first, and then some of the other municipal business that couldn't wait to the next meeting. September 3rd is a milestone, as the council president's message will be due for your consideration, and the public hearing, the first hearing on the budget ordinance and the first reading of the ordinance will be on September 16th at 5:30 in this council chambers. Finally, on September 23rd, that'll be a special city council meeting and the final adoption of the budget ordinance somewhere around, well, we'd start at 5:30, but depending upon how long deliberation goes. I want to talk briefly about some of the budget changes that have gone along over the last year in particular, and maybe a couple in the past. There are a couple of adjustments that we've made in the budget that have been with us in this year's budget, but also carried over from last year's budget. We'll start in revenues for one. So online sales taxes we began to collect those. The state began to collect those in October of last year, and those collections continue and will continue indefinitely, and that is to collect sales taxes from online sales. We estimate in the budget and have included in the revenue projections about somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000. Right now we're on track for about $250,000 Some estimates suggest maybe that could be double that by the end of the year for a good online sales tax collection. We're just not really certain. Sales tax is volatile, as you all know. It's very difficult to predict. We've been monitoring it month after month after month, and one month we might be 5% up, and the next month we might be 3% down. So it's just really difficult to tell at this point. So we're being pretty conservative on sales tax revenues. As you know, the last couple of budgets did include a sizable property tax adjustment. We are not including that in this year's budget, but I wanted to give you the sense as to what that's meant in our budget, because those adjustments are going to be generating about $8.2 million above the 2017 numbers. So that includes the last two property tax adjustments. And that's been significant. As difficult as those decisions were, it is what's helped us move the budget into a more sustainable path going forward. Hub City funding is something that we're able now to budget for due to the state legislature's decisions to modify the formula and the benefit that we will receive from that. And conservative estimates, as we've mentioned in the past, look to be about $2.7 million annually of additional collection. So we'll increase our revenue projections for Hub City funding by about that amount. And then lastly, interest income. We have been intentional about trying to get better returns from some of the funds that we've invested in, and those returns are paying off to the tune of almost $700,000 annually above 2017 numbers. So every penny counts, and the more that we can work the money and have it work for us, the better off it is. So these are some pretty big swings on the revenue side. But we've also made adjustments collectively on the expense side as well. You might recall, based on the 2018 budget, we're still down about 15 positions. Our operational cost reductions that we began or instituted in 2018 have been carried forward in the last two budgets, and that's certainly the case in 2020's budget. The Community Facilities Fund, that has been reprogrammed, and all of those funds are going to flood control, as you know, and so that's important work. And then grants and donations, we reduced about $600,000 per year since 2018, and you'll see the same going forward in this year's budget as well. So up next, we want to talk about some other major budget factors. Many in the community are aware, but may not have remembered, that the recreation and auditorium departments essentially were transferred over to the Parks District. That was effective April 1st. And so what we've done in this next budget is we've reduced the full allotment of mills that were dedicated to support those two departments, and instead the Parks District will be picking up those mills and carrying them forward as revenues on their side to make up for the addition of those two departments into their operation. So that's going to explain the 8 mil reduction, or roughly 8 mil reduction. It's almost that much in the budget, and I'll talk a little bit about numbers here in a little bit later in the slide presentation. There is a very, very slight increase in valuations collectively across the city. That's almost unnoticeable, but worth pointing out, I guess. And then finally, we are deploying long-saved reserves, and I'll talk about that here a little bit later as well, to use on projects. Things like the NAWS money, the flood control money, and other reserves are being deployed now for one-time project costs. Again, pointing out that we have gotten away from using reserves to cover operational costs. Very, very bad habit. We're not doing that. So we're just talking about project coverage here. Moving forward in building the budget, our budget is, I would venture to say, the 2020 budget is probably the largest budget this city has ever developed. It's astonishing for the size of our town. It's a $275 million budget. That's $95 million above last year's budget, or a 52% increase. And here are the culprits for that budget increase. Flood construction, both inside the city and outside the city, highway projects, capital purchases, and water projects. Those are some big dollars. They all add up to that additional $95 million above the standard operation for the city. So I thought it was worth mentioning the breakdown of those particular projects, particularly in sources, because not all that money is coming from the city. I think that's the big misnomer. Like, oh my gosh, where'd you guys get an extra $95 million from? You know, what have you been sitting on? That's not the case. So I broke it down here into state and local matches, as well as federal matches as well. And so what you'll see here is each of those categories that I just talked about are described here on the screen. Flood control, that's a $25.9 million budget allotment for the city, and that's 16.8 coming from the state, 9.1 coming locally. So you can see not the full amount. The same carries forward when you look at the sales tax numbers that we're going to be deploying toward flood control outside the city limits. The state's contributing 26.3 of the 31.8, and we're contributing to 13.4. Again, highway projects, you see the same sort of match. Local, 2.4 million. State, 6.9 of the 9.3. In capital purchases, these are purchases, particularly capital projects that we've put off, like the fire station, other things that we're deploying reserves that we've been building for those projects. We're going to be leveraging about 8.7 million of those dollars. And then finally, about 6.24 million of local money towards the 11.7 in water projects are being leveraged, with 4.6 remaining coming from the state. So that means that essentially of the $95 million in new projects, about 55 million are coming from state, federal sources, and 40 million is coming from the local share, large part reserves and ongoing collections that will occur throughout the next year. I've also identified the projects here, which I won't go into. It's just if you want to look at it, you'll have that either on the video or certainly in the presentation that you'll get later. So the preliminary budget, here's the bottom line. The 2019 budget, which is what we're currently in and we're operating off of, had a mill levy rate of 129.23 mills. We are reducing by almost 8 mills due to the recreation auditorium shift. And so that's going to leave us with a 2020 mill levy about 121.29. That's a zero increase. It's just really a transfer of the mills from us to the Parks District. So that will essentially look like a reduction on the city's portion of the tax bill by about 6%, but it's really not a reduction on the consolidated tax bill because it's just simply being shifted to the Parks District. So this is what it looks like. Essentially, the city of Minot will represent about 34% of the consolidated tax bill. The public schools, about 33%, Ward County, 21%, and the Parks District at 12%. The median home value now has gone up from $178,000 to $179,000, and so the city's proportionate or portion that is being reduced with the mill transfer essentially equates to about $58.14 per year, or $4.85 per month. And again, the Parks District will absorb that to cover the auditorium and recreation costs. So if you look at the consolidated tax bill, this is essentially what we're looking at, and this is only the Minot portion of the property tax bill. And I also know that you always like to know, well, what are the other jurisdictions doing with their mills and whatnot? So here's the best we can tell at this point, collecting the information as of late. We're, of course, reducing 8 mills. The Parks District will increase 8 mills. It looks like the public school district, Minot Public Schools, is going to remain mostly flat. And that Ward County is milling over, to use the pun, perhaps a 3% mill increase. So we're not really sure. I don't think they've decided on that. So here's what the property tax numbers look like between 2019 and 2020 for the median home value of $179,000 for the city-only portion of the tax bill. Okay, so that's that. As you know, we have instituted 5-year financial projection models into budgeting now. And as you know, for 2020 and even looking toward 2021, things are looking pretty good. But things after 2021 start to get strained in the budget, mostly related to a couple of different areas. One, flood control. As flood control continues to get more expensive, we'll have to have more revenue to cover those costs, and we've presented those models to you in the past. But also, we have deferred maintenance that we need to catch up with as well. And there's some big capital expenditures coming our way to ensure that we do just that. So we're going to need to continue to watch the budget, watch revenues, evaluate projects, prioritize those projects, and determine which of those are the highest priority for the city based on the limited resources we have, and if we need to make any adjustments going forward on either the revenue or the expenditure side. But the good news is this is the first time in my 3 years with the city that this budget just didn't kill me. It's great to present this budget to you. I'm not necessarily excited about the $275 million budget, but the fact that we're not having to do property tax increases and those kinds of things, go through all that stuff, is super fantastic. So I will also tell you, you'll see in your budget, there are no rate increases planned for the water utility, the sewer utility, or the stormwater utility. We also wanted to keep those flat, if you will. There's a couple adjustments for airport fees and a very small couple adjustments for the transit. But essentially the others are remaining flat. We really felt strongly, and the charge that I directed the staff was, let's give the citizens a break. Of course, that came from you as well. So we've been able to carry that forward into the utilities as well. So I'm pretty proud of that. All right, moving forward, things to remember in the budget. NAS, we have a $55 million lift and currently have about $30 million for that project. Flood control, as I mentioned, as the project grows, so do the costs, and so will our revenues need to. Maintenance backlogs, I've kind of mentioned already, depending on how aggressive we want to get with those. And then certainly capital needs going forward are going to have to be evaluated against themselves and available revenues to see what we might be able to do in moving as many of those projects forward as we can. So here's the next steps in the budget. First of all, we want to review the budget workshop information. We've had 2 budget workshops, you might recall. Those presentations are available, the notes and all that stuff, the videos, that kind of thing. Also, certainly look at the 2020 budget book. Generate your list of questions. We love your questions. If you've got simple, straightforward questions, you don't have to save those for a council meeting. Just go ahead and email us those questions. We'll get them knocked out and use the time at the council meetings to address the really big and important questions. So generate your list of questions, meet with myself or the staff. Department heads would love to talk to you about their budgets. And so meet with them, meet with me, finance director, finance staff, whatever. Please don't surprise staff. It doesn't make for efficient meetings when staff are surprised when we get to the Q&A and you haven't at least given us an opportunity to do some research or some background or those kinds of things. I know sometimes that happens inadvertently, but I would strongly advise that you do the preparation right now to prepare for the Q&A and allow us the same opportunity so that we can bring to you meaningful and accurate answers to your questions. So again, August 19th at 4:15 in the auditorium room 201 will be the Q&A session, and we'll go as long as you want us to go on that. So that's all I have for the preliminary budget presentation for you. I didn't go into details other than just some of the highlights, but happy reading. I will stand for any questions you might have.
Any questions for our city manager on the release of the preliminary budget? And just a reminder to the alderman as well, as now with the release of the preliminary budget, it cannot go any higher, only lower at this point.
Correct.
So the record budget is not going to get any higher.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, City Manager Barry.
You bet.
Thank you, Dave. Believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, we have run out of topics this evening.
Thank you, David.
So I would move to the last item on our agenda, which is adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Easy for those
Moved by
questions.
Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Pittner. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.